And once you and I go into business, we own and operate at least the businesses in our community. What we will be doing is developing a situation wherein we will actually be able to create employment for the people in the community. And once you can create some employment in the community where you live, it will eliminate the necessity of you and me having to act ignorantly and disgracefully, boycotting and picketing some cracker someplace else, trying to beg him for a job.
Black on everything, nigga. Drop bricks. Tulsa. Kingsley. It's a brand, you know. Black on everything, take a glance, you know. You can see it on my shirt, on my pants, you know. Had to make these motherfuckers understand, you know. I'm just saying it's about time we expand, you know. Take a stand, you know. Make demands, you know. Take a chance, you know. Black owned everything by the fam, you know. I put that on everything that I am, you know.
You know the saying, if you knew better, you'll do better. A lot of people ain't make it from where we came from, where it's too clever. Youngin' learns how to plant down on his own seeds, not a fruit better. Translation, you can only dumb your sound down if you let them do better. I'm the product of my poverty. Mama never owned property. The eviction notice landlord's game, that's the first form of monopoly. Found out I was indigenous to America, was a shock to me. Time to get my Aboriginal Americans out of poverty. Time to get it for real. Yup, we ain't gon' play no games with them. Linked up with some real hitters, that's where I'm from, with the same vision. Tulsa, okay, Greenwood, we gon' make it happen again. Aboriginal Wall Street, for my ancestors, we gon' make it last.
It's a brand, you know. Black on everything, take a glance, you know. You can see it on my shirt, on my pants, you know. Had to make these motherfuckers understand, you know. I'm just saying it's about time we expand, you know. Take a stand, you know. Make a man, you know. Take a chance, you know. Black owned everything by the fam, you know. I put that on everything that I am, you know. I done built your walls, I done paid your fines, I done made you rich while I'm barely getting by. I done slaved away at your heart's desires, had to take it all away for a piece of mind. Taking back my cream and my dreams, Carby King, fuck you mean. Hidden agendas that you never seen, like when in the fuck is a COVID-19. Make us sick to force vaccines, but we not trying to take no streams. Boost up black man self-esteem, no they not trying to see that scene. Cops blaming at us again, no more shaking hands. Black man with a master plan, they fear who I am. Trying to hide my identity, but I know where I stand. Grinding for me and the fam, reborn and do it again. It's a brand, you know, black on everything, take a glance, you know. You can see it on my shirt, on my pants, you know. Had to make these motherfuckers understand, you know. I'm just saying it's about time we expand, you know. Black on everything, take a glance, you know. You can see it on my shirt, on my pants, you know. Had to make these motherfuckers understand, you know. I'm saying it's about time we expand, you know. Take a stand, you know. Make demands, you know. Take a chance, you know. Black on everything for the fam, you know. I put that on everything that I am, you know. Take a stand, you know. Make a man, you know. Take a chance, you know. Fuck it, expand, you know. Black on everything for the fam, you know. I put that on everything that I am, you know.
Our hearts forever. Rest in peace, Dick Rowland. Rest in peace, Jimmy, Lily Franklin. And all the survivors. Shout out to all our ancestors, man. We coming back for everything that they stole. Let's get it.
Peace, love, and light to everybody that's in the building. Grand Rising. Hopefully everybody's having a beautiful day. I got actually a pretty decent show for you guys today. I got a pretty decent show for you guys today. But before we get into the show today, I just want to get the energies right. I do need everybody in the building to hit that like button. Let me know that y'all can hear me loud and clear. Drop a fire emoji. Y'all see the title, man. We're going to be exposing some of these narratives that they give us about history. And what's even better than starting in my own personal state, which I'm going to be going through various different main cities throughout Tennessee, and then we'll make our way to other states around, getting into this alternative history, this alternative narrative about history. And we know that they have been lying to us the entire time, family. So we're going to be going into the Nashvilles 1897 World's Fair, and we're going to expose the narrative. We're going to be showing you ancient forts, hidden technology, and how they was already doing photo manipulation in the mid 1800s. Excuse me. So we got some heat for you guys. I want you guys to get ready. So if you're ready to rock the house, I need you guys to rock the house. Salute to everybody that's in the building. Share the live stream and make sure you guys support. The most important thing you guys can do right now is support the channel. You understand what I'm saying? I can't even stress to you how important it is for you guys to support the channel. Now, shout out to my sister Nami, aka Empress Namaste, in the chat. She did put the Cash App information in the chat, and it is pinned at the top of the live chat. Okay, so make sure y'all tap in and support the movement. Support the movement. Support the movement. All right. So most importantly, like I said, hit that like button and share. But like I said, you're not obligated, but we do appreciate it. So if y'all ready to get into some of this heat, let's get this thing flooded out with some fire emojis. Shout out to Empress Namaste, Tennessee King, body artist. Who else we got here? Glass Moon, Gable, Original Intellect. JD is in the building. You live in Nashville. Well, this should be a treat. Now, by the way, family, this is going to be a part 2, maybe even a part 3 series, but definitely a part 2. So we're going to get into this right now, and I'm gonna open this thing up with a little audio. And so, if y'all ready, let's go.
For the stats, I be beating the odds. In the blood, it be making me calm. Ride the turbines just like I'm Saddam. I'ma blow it just like I'm a bomb. I'ma leave it.
Which was meant to showcase Tennessee's natural resources. They describe it as rustic, but on a grand scale, with exhibits of lumber, ores, and coal. It's a little easier to imagine this one as a temporary structure, but again, the official images make it look a lot more substantial than what you'd expect from wood and plaster. And once more, there's no construction photos, just a building that appears in the fairs for a few shots and then disappears. Then you had the Woman's Building, which right away you notice the colonial style architecture.
Now I'm gonna add my additional information in here, but I'm going to let this brother Mondon Vale set the scene. And shout out to Mondon Vale. This is a great video. This is a great bill he did. I will leave the link to the full video in the description box, so make sure y'all go check that out. I'm gonna let him set the narrative and the scene of what I want. He sets it perfect, and I'm gonna add some additional information on to it, and we're just gonna rock out. I'm gonna add my commentary to it as well. So let's get right into it. Shout out to everybody that's in the building.
Looks like an old New England or even Georgian style that was dropped right into the fairgrounds. Because the thing is, if you look at other World's Fairs, they leaned heavy into Beaux-Arts, neoclassical, domes and arches, all this over-the-top grandeur. But Nashville has this colonial revival look with some of these buildings. I think there's a reason beyond just wanting to project tradition.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it.
My bad about the commercials, y'all. I gotta pay my premium. I gotta pay for my premium to give me a second. I'll pay for this.
Lake in the middle of the grounds, and it had gondolas, fountains, and was a whole centerpiece for the fair. But if you think about the scale of what they're saying, this wasn't a pond. I mean, this is a full water feature with landscaping, statues, lighting, and all supposedly temporary. Like, who goes through the trouble of excavating a whole lake just for a 6-month fair? The children's building supposedly was an exhibit space for children's education and childcare. It's a smaller building, but it has a lot of ornamentation details. They describe it like it was there to represent the future of the state. But really, it seems like this was a programming center for creating more nights. I'll break that down in a minute. Then we have this Rialto Bridge, which doesn't seem to get highlighted a lot. This is another supposed replica. They literally recreated the Ponte de Rialto from Venice. Now, why Venice? And why that specific bridge? On the surface, it seems that they're just trying to add some European flair, but the Rialto isn't just any bridge. It's loaded with fraternity symbolism. We'll come back to that in a moment too. The Agriculture Building was another one of these giant halls, and they bragged about it being one of the largest at the fair, with the facade full of arches and ornamentation. The official story says that it was just staff and wood, which I guess you can imagine for a temporary exposition, but when you see the photos, it looks more like a courthouse or civic hall. Then right next to this, there was the Machinery Building.
Let me add this commentary in. Now, when you go and look up the research, which I've did quite a bit of research on these World's Fair, all of the structures that you see in the 1800s, early 1900s of these World's Fair, they're always described as temporary structures. Usually plaster and wood is what they made out of, not even made out of real sturdy material. So I want y'all to keep that in mind, because that's one of the things that we're going to be challenging as we continue to build. Okay, so keep that in mind, family. They say that these are temporary structures. All right, y'all got that in the chat? If y'all got that, drop a fire emoji.
This one was massive. They said it had a steel frame with staff cladding, and it housed all the modern machines of the age. Then you had the Negro Building, which the book actually calls one of the largest of its kind ever.
The Negro Building. Now, listen, I'm gonna do some side history on the Negro Building. But
steel frame with staff cladding, and it housed all the modern machines of the age. Then you had the Negro Building, which the book actually calls one of the largest of its kind ever built at a fair, and it was meant to showcase African American progress 30 years after the Civil War. And finally, there's the United States Government Building. There's many more structures, like the Transportation Building, which showed off railroads and locomotives, the Hygiene and Education Buildings, which were supposedly dedicated to health, medicine, and schools. Then you had the State Buildings, where different states set up their own exhibits, and most of those were simple pavilions, nothing on the scale of the main halls. But the one that really stands out is the Memphis Building, because they decided their contribution to Tennessee's Centennial Fair would be a full-on Egyptian pyramid right in the middle of Nashville. And this doesn't look temporary either. I mean, think about the choice here. Nashville puts up a Greek temple, Memphis builds an Egyptian pyramid, and then you've got a Venetian Rialto bridge connecting it all. We will connect all that in a moment, but the official history just waves it away as a bit of fun architectural flair. But if you're paying attention, you'll start to see a pattern. Greek initiation wisdom, Egyptian mysteries, Venetian brotherhoods, all under American progress presented on this stage. And of course, all these structures just vanish without a trace, leaving us with nothing but photographs and promotional text to take on faith.
Now, what's weird about this is I'm going to give you an alternative scenario of what I think these buildings is, because I don't believe that they're temporary buildings at all. I actually believe that they actually are prior existing buildings from a prior civilization. Why would one of the most religious states, Tennessee, which is one of the most Christianized states, build the Capitol building in a memorial of a Greek building in Greek deities in a Christian ran state? I need that to be, just keep that in mind, okay? Keep that in mind.
The only structure that survived is the Parthenon, and they tell us it was reconstructed in the 1920s. Okay, so let's start breaking this whole story down and why it honestly seems like complete BS. Here's the bird's eye view so we can get an idea of how big this fair supposedly was. Notice all the people. The trolleys bringing in crowds.
First of all, let's just go back and look at this. Does this look like old Tennessee, or does this look like some European city in the 1800s? Why were they modeling the World's Fair after some alleged European cities, taking bits and pieces from various different parts of Europe? We're going to break down this symbolism, because within every detail of a structure, there's a story to be told. This is what the Masons did. See, when Masons built the buildings, and they did it within code words and code language. It's called sacred geometry, the language of angles. Let's go.
Notice all the people. The trolleys bringing in crowds. This is how they wanted to present it, as if this place was buzzing with life every single day. Now let's start with the Parthenon. First off, we have zero photos of its actual construction before the fair. Saying it was due to exposure issues or that
they have no images of this being constructed. Now, by the way, I just want to make this clear for those that don't know. This particular structure was allegedly built before the Civil War and before slaves were emancipated. Make that make sense. When your president was born in an outhouse, the size, or a log cabin, the size of an outhouse, you got this structure been created allegedly in 1845 or maybe 1847, in between one of those.
Photography wasn't common enough isn't a valid excuse. It's suspicious, plain and simple. Then, when it comes to the 1920s reconstruction, we only get like 2 photos. If you type in Parthenon construction photos, nothing even really comes up. The only thing I could find was a History for Kids site and an Only in Tennessee article.
If you go look, if y'all stop what you're doing right now, this is a side quest for you guys. If you stop what you're doing right now and you go pull up an image of Montezuma, right? You go pull up an image of Montezuma, you're going to see the same buildings in the background. Excuse me, let me get this off the screen. You're going to see these same buildings in the background, family. If you go pull up an image of Montezuma right now, you're going to see these same images, family. You're going to see these same buildings and structures right behind him in the illustrated photos. This is documented. This is in the Library of Congress. Y'all can stop what y'all doing. Go type in Montezuma, and that image is from the 1500s, Montezuma. And they show these same buildings behind him that they're calling the Capitol building and shit today. Okay? I just need y'all to keep that in mind as we make these strides to debunk the narrative. Okay, we're debunking the narrative. I just need that to be known. That's what we're doing right now. So I need the family to get on the board. I will pull up an image of that Montezuma for y'all too.
Cool. That says 10 stunning photos of construction, but only showed 2. And both were pulled straight from the Centennial Park Conservancy website, which is basically the official park site. But what's weird is they actually removed their own history page. Now there's no info about the Parthenon's history on their site at all. Why? Why would you take that down if this is your city's crown jewel? Don't you want people to know the history? So all we really get are 2 or 3 construction shots from the 1920s, and I doubt those too. We don't see any clear stages, just one interior shot and maybe a couple of angles of scaffolding.
Them buildings been around.
There's one high quality photo floating around Instagram, but honestly, that's not enough evidence to convince me that this building was completely reconstructed. And I know if you're hearing this for the first time, that probably sounds crazy, but think about it. We're supposed to believe a wooden frame, plaster building from 1897 lasted 20 years before they rebuilt it? That doesn't sound temporary to me. The only other photo I
the only other photos you can find that they
is from
already created.
1895, supposedly showing the cornerstone ceremony. Okay.
Now listen, I'm gonna show y'all this image of Montezuma real quick. And if y'all notice, on both the left and the right side of him, there's buildings in the background. These buildings are being illustrated in a lithnograph Library of Congress documented photo image of Montezuma in the 1500s. What are you saying, Bab? I'm saying these freaking buildings had already been around, structural style and all, since the 1500s, and the indigenous peoples created these type of buildings like we see in your Capitol building. Okay? I just need y'all to bear with me. We got a lot more to cook on. I need y'all to bear with me. We're going to cook this morning, but I need y'all to support the channel.
Okay, so they could take photos of that, but somehow nobody thought to document the actual construction of the most prominent building at the fair? That's suspicious. But listen to this. So this whole temporary structure thing is a lie. It was never made with wood and plaster, and I'm about to prove it. So just so you can see, type in Google, was Parthenon at the Nashville World's Fair a temporary structure? And it says, yes, it was made from wood, plaster, and brick, and then rebuilt with more permanent materials. But guess what? They made a mistake. I first saw this with one of these promotional illustrations. It said the Parthenon was a fireproof building.
When you look at the colors of all the Aboriginal indigenous peoples, they always were a unified color: red, white, and blue, red, blue, and gold, red, blue, and black, red, blue, and green. These variation colors. The red and blue has always been initial colors in America. They just symbolized them, reversed them, and gave it back to you as political parties or blood and Crips. It's always been a color symbolism based on our people that we set the standard on. Nobody made Montezuma wear these colors. He designed and picked this out himself.
And I thought that was weird but it wasn't really conclusive enough. But this debunks the whole story. There's a
Now
book
look,
that came out the same year as the
now
fair.
look, they saying that this Parthenon building was temporary, but the initial writing from the World's Fair said that this is a fireproof building. How can a wooded temporary building that's made of wood and plaster be fireproof? So that's a lie. They said the buildings, according to Wikipedia, in the 1987 Nashville's World's Fair were built temporarily in Wikipedia, but the actual paper says that they were built as fireproof structures. Come on now, make that make sense. Make that make sense.
In the cornerstone ceremony.
Let's run it back.
Okay, so they could take photos of that, but somehow nobody thought to document the actual construction of the most prominent building at the fair? That's suspicious. But listen to this. So this whole temporary structure thing is a lie. It was never made with wood and plaster, and I'm about to prove it. So just so you can see, type in Google, was Parthenon at the Nashville World's Fair a temporary structure?
Good
And
to
it
hear
says,
you too,
yes,
Empress.
it was made
Empress,
from
we're waiting
wood,
to see you in here,
plaster,
sister.
and brick,
All
and then
love.
rebuilt with more permanent materials. But guess what? They made a mistake. I first saw this with one of these promotional illustrations. It said the Parthenon was a fireproof building. And I thought that was weird, but it wasn't really conclusive enough. But this debunks the whole story. There's a book that came out the same year as the fair. It doesn't have an author, but it's in the Library of Congress. Look at this. Quote, "This glorious temple, securely built of stone, brick, and iron to render it fireproof." Whoa, hold up a second. That is not the mainstream narrative. It doesn't say that on any single website on the history of the Parthenon. That
Right.
means it wasn't a temporary.
Look, right here, it says it's originally built out of plaster, wood, and brick. But right here, it said it was built out of stone, brick, and iron, making it fireproof. Which one is it? Caught them in the lie already. Let's go.
Structure. This is the book that came out with the fair. The book does not say wood and plaster. It's literally saying it's a permanent fireproof building. And yes, it does say temporary home, but that doesn't mean it's a temporary structure. It's talking about the art gallery inside. And I should mention they had something called the Vanity Fair, which was basically the amusement section of the fair. Now this I can actually believe because these structures look cheap. You can see the contrast plain as day when you compare them to the main exposition buildings. But one thing I thought was weird is they were showing off x-ray machines to the public for the very first time here.
So they were showing off x-ray machines for the first time here. X-ray machines.
What was weird is they were showing off x-ray machines to the public for the very first time here. From this point forward, there aren't really any construction photos that I could find. A lot of these photos don't even really show that many people. I mean, in a few examples you can see the crowds, but they're saying on some occasions there were like 98,000 people showing up, or that was the greatest attendance for this parade, but it doesn't seem like there are that many people here. Most of the photos show off the buildings themselves and they seem empty. I'm not saying there are zero photos of people because...
Now look, now by the way, allegedly during this World's Fair that lasted for 6 months in 1897 in Nashville, over 1.4 million people came to Nashville. Now mind you, Nashville only had a population, I think, of 70,000 people. But over a million people came in a 6 month span. You know, it don't look like nobody's there.
It doesn't seem like there are that many people.
Something ain't right. They're telling us something ain't right.
Here. Most of the photos show off the buildings themselves and they seem empty. I'm not saying there are zero photos of people because, sure, there are a few showing crowds near the Parthenon or the pyramid, but to me, a lot of them look staged. And honestly, they look painted over or manipulated.
Yeah, the World's Fair wasn't just showing off old world structures. It was also displaying to the world the old world technology that was here. This is nothing that they created. Now let's just look at this photo right here. Do you think these people built this building in the 1800s using horse, buggy, and wagon? Mind you, this was built during the Civil War, 1847. Do you believe that? These little old primitive people.
That's not a reach either. Here's one of the most famous photos. There's literally no one here. Okay, how about this photo? Yeah, I'm pretty sure those people are painted in. And yet, this very photo shows up on National Geographic, presented as if it were a real scene. But it's not. It's a presentation photo. It's a showcase image. That's the evidence we're left with. Here's a photo that supposedly shows the grounds under construction before 1897. But if you look closely, the main structures are already built. This is basically the only progression photo we get. And if you look at the section to the right, you can see they actually added scaffolding in after the fact, meaning they painted it in. One of the wooden beams literally goes across the dirt road, and they're all slanted. That's
facts. Look. This is photo manipulation in the 1800s. And by the way, for those that don't believe that they were doing it, they were masters at photo manipulation in the 1800s.
It's not natural. And this photo is hosted on National Geographic site like it's legit. I see this all the time in archived photos. People think that just because it says glass negative or it's stored in an archive that it's 100% untouched and true. That's not the case. A lot of these old photos were retouched, airbrushed, or even manipulated outright. And really, there are a few other photos that have this weird stuff with these people. You've got two famous shots in front of the pyramid and lake, but I strongly suspect those were tampered with too. Look at the people in the foreground.
Hey, let me say this right quick, man. Salute to everybody that's in the building. Hit that like button. Let's get at least 3 people to support the channel, man. Salute the Wake and Bake Show. We just getting started, man. We got a lot more to get into. So I hope y'all ready to rock the house out. Y'all already know the vibes. Let's go.
It actually happened either. We can talk about why later, but right now saying why just makes this whole thing overcomplicated. I'm asking something simple. What actual evidence do we have that this really happened? And the truth is, we don't have much to go on. Books, posters, newspapers, photos, all of that can be faked or staged. The population of Nashville at that time was around 70,000, way less than San Francisco or Chicago during their World's Fairs. Yet, we're supposed to believe over 1 million people came through a much smaller town in just 6 months? Where were they all staying? There was no grand hotel built for the fair. They say, oh, this is the hotel that was built to accommodate visitors. But that's not nearly enough space. And apparently it was called the men's quarter.
Right. Think about it. They built this World's Fair. The city of Nashville only got a population of 70,000. There ain't just a bunch of loose homes that's just empty. Where are they housing this 1.4 million people? Or is that a lie? Or was it never no people that never came here? Think about it. Wouldn't that be one of the most recorded, talked about things in history? A bunch of people, millions of people coming to Nashville. Hell, Negroes would have been writing about that in their own document by saying the large influx of Europeans and people coming into the city. And where are you housing them at? At one hotel? You can't put 1.4 million people at that hotel.
Built for the fair. They say, oh, this is the hotel that was built to accommodate visitors. But that's not nearly enough space. And apparently it was called the men's quarter, so no respectable woman would even go there. So where are all the families staying? And keep in mind, that same place became a strip club less than 10 years after the fair. Does that add up to you? Utopia Hotel. Interesting name, right? So yeah, In short, the theory is that the Nashville World's Fair was a staged historical event by Freemasons. Now, when I say Freemasons here, I'm really using it interchangeably. I mean secret society members. That's not a stretch. I'm not saying, oh, it was the Illuminati. No, literally, why do you think there was a pyramid there? Why do you think they built a replica of a pagan temple? No idea. They were just being creative. Nashville was the Athens of the South. That's what local historians will tell you. They'll just say it was revival architecture.
I don't even think that these so-called people that they're calling Masons built it. I believe they founded it. I believe they understand the knowledge behind it, but I don't believe that they actually constructed these things. I believe that the reason you see a pyramid there, because that was already there. The reason you see a Greek Parthenon building there is because it was already there, built by the indigenous peoples. As a matter of fact, I was reading in one of my books not too long ago. I was reading in one of my books. It was the Ancient Mississippi Monuments. It's a good ass book. You see what I'm saying? It goes into a lot of different shit. You see what I'm saying? And in one particular book, it talks about all this structures in Tennessee that was already there. You see what I'm saying? And it goes deep. You feel what I'm saying? It goes real deep. I might even pull that up for y'all in a second, because I think it's valid to the conversation, because what they find in this particular place shows like forts and structures, and it was already here. Matter of fact, let me read this segment out of the book real quick. And this is all from Tennessee. Now, this book, I'm gonna give y'all the name of the book. The name of this book is called The Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, comprising the results of original surveys and explorations. And it was written by E.G. Squirrel and E.H. Davis. It was written, this book right here was written in 1887, family. Now look, we're gonna read right here. Right, it said numerous other defense works are represented to exist in Tennessee, but very few of them have been surveyed and described. Now listen, in Bedford County, which is in Middle Tennessee, there is a stonework considerable size with walls of which are said to be from 6 to 20 feet to 16 to 20 feet high at the base and 4 foot wide on the top. Other works adjoined it. It is generally believed that it was erected by DeSoto. Now, look, peep gang, they're saying that it was erected by DeSoto. But in 1819, an oak tree standing on the walls was cut down, which exhibit 300 rings in a 57 annual layers, and must consensually have been 78 years before DeSoto. So in other words, they saying that DeSoto resurrected this particular structure with the walls and this building that's in Bedford County. But he's saying, no, it couldn't have been, because the tree that was there is just as long as the wall that was pretty much built into the structure of the wall. When they cut the tree down, the tree resembled that the tree had already been there 78 years before DeSoto even touched down in Florida. You see what I'm saying? So there's historical structures here all throughout America. And when you get into the natural aboriginal history of Tennessee, it talks about other structures as well, which I'm going to pull that up and show y'all some more sources.
Right. But most people, especially skeptics, aren't aware that these World's Fairs were planned and orchestrated by Freemasons. And you have to understand, this isn't always an obvious association, because there are many different fraternities and secret societies. Freemasons aren't the only ones. We kind of know this already with the Paris World's Fair, but it's not so obvious with every fair. Don't believe it? Well, let's just dive into the secret society connections to the Nashville World's Fair.
Hey man, if y'all enjoying the build so far, y'all let me know. Drop a fire emoji in the chat. This is just a part 1 to a part 3 series that we're going to do. So make sure y'all thumb up the video and support the channel if y'all like these type of builds. You feel me? Support the channel. All right. Share this and hit that like button.
Because I think it's more obvious with Nashville than anywhere else. And it actually answers a lot of questions. Take the pyramid, or the Memphis building. Let's just start there. Why did they decide to do this? The mainstream story says it's because the busy and historic capital of Shelby County bears the name of ancient Memphis. Okay, but that just raises another question. Why did they call it Memphis, Tennessee in the first place? Don't you think that's an odd name? You find a city and decide to name it after an ancient Egyptian capital? It doesn't make sense until you connect it to Freemasonry. Freemasons have always been obsessed with Egyptian and Greek mythology. Many of you Nashville locals already know about this. You can see it right in the middle of downtown. It's the Downtown Presbyterian Church. Do you want to tell me why one of the oldest Christian churches in Nashville is built in Egyptian revival style and features a bas-relief of Amun-Ra, the Egyptian sun god, right at the front entrance? There's only one explanation. This was built by Christian Freemasons. William Strickland, the architect, was a Freemason and also literally built Masonic halls in Philadelphia. There is no denying this Freemason Egyptian connection. It's called the Rite of Memphis Mizraim. Anyone who's researched Freemasonry knows this. Look at their seal. Notice that temple there? This is what we're actually dealing with. These Masonic rites go back to the early 1700s. But here's something that caught my eye. The Rite of Mizraim, Mizraim is the Hebrew name for Egypt, was established in Venice in the late 18th century. Suddenly, that explains the Rialto Bridge replica. I wasn't sure why they chose to do a copy of that bridge, but now it makes perfect sense. Why did they build this random Venetian bridge? There's a reason. Because this bridge is associated with secret brotherhoods and fraternities going back to the 15th century. It's one of the most famous and oldest bridges in Venice. But listen to this. I was looking into the background of the bridge, and I found out about a famous painting called The Miracle of the Relic of the Cross at the Ponte de Rialto. This painting shows a miracle of a madman being healed from a Christian relic. But more importantly, it was commissioned for the Grand Hall of the Scuola Grande de San Giovanni Evangelista, the seat of a brotherhood in Venice. And sorry if I pronounced that wrong. But that's the connection. That's why they made the replica. It's not random architecture. It's a secret society and brotherhood reference sitting in the middle of Centennial Park. So that's why they had a pyramid. It's not just because Memphis is called Memphis, because the founders saw a parallel between the city's locations on great rivers. Yeah, no, that's not a good enough explanation. What makes more sense is that Memphis was actually a major center for the Prince Hall tradition and this Egyptian rite we just talked about. Now, I'd be surprised if there are any historians who'd actually deny this. But if that wasn't enough, literally right by the pyramid was another structure we haven't talked about yet. Right next door was the Knights of Pythias Pavilion. And this is a weird story because supposedly there are two surviving structures from the fair. The Parthenon, which everybody knows, and this pavilion that they tell us was moved all the way to Franklin on horse-drawn wagons. No photos of this, no documentation of the move, but sure, here it is today in its new location. So that's a strange story, not something a lot of people know. But the fact is, this was a secret society pavilion. And most Knights of Pythias were also Freemasons. So why is this here, at the heart of the fair? Oh, and I forgot to mention, the official book that came out the same year as the fair flat out says the pyramid was a rendezvous point. What does that even mean? Same thing here. Apparently the Knights of Pythias needed their own resting place and conference area. That's not a normal fair exhibit. It's literally a hall. And when you start digging into these fraternities, the overlaps are obvious. Knights of Pythias was built on the exact same Masonic model. Degrees, initiation rites, oaths. Their three guiding principles? Friendship, charity, benevolence. Right. And we're just supposed to believe that all this was a secret society devoted to friendship? What does that even mean? So they have this whole myth that they base themselves on. Pythias was accused of plotting against Dionysius of Syracuse, sentenced to death, but begged to settle his affairs first. Dionysius agreed on the condition that his friend Damon be held hostage, to be executed if Pythias didn't return. So then Pythias shows up at the last second, proves his loyalty, and Dionysius is so moved he spares them both. Aw, how cute. It's all about true friendship, right? No, this is secret brotherhood coding. Let me break it down. So on the surface, this is the myth the Knights of Pythias used publicly. A chivalric tale of loyalty, brotherhood, and moral virtue. Nice and clean, easy to sell to the public. Okay, but let's look at the occult and esoteric side of it. First off, the name Pythias isn't random. It's a nod to Pythagoras and the Pythian mysteries. The whole Pythian Apollo cult at Delphi was about oracles, hidden knowledge, secrecy, prophecy, initiation. Demon offering himself in place of Pythias is literally a sacrificial substitution ritual. In occult societies, this is the exact same thing as a stand-in victim in initiation drama. A brother willing to die in another's place. It's just straight up ritual symbolism for death and rebirth initiations. So on one level, Pythias isn't just a friend, it's referencing Delphic initiation traditions. Then there's the Pythias-Python connection. The word itself is tied to Python, the serpent slain by Apollo at Delphi. The priestess at Delphi was the Pythia, the oracle. So the name carries serpentine, chthonic, oracular overtones. You're dealing with serpent cult energy, but disguised as a cute moral tale about friendship. The key is the order calls itself Knights.
Now think about it. Serpent, colt. I'm gonna break this shit down. Well, let's let them finish setting the stage. You're getting somewhere.
Like medieval Christian chivalry, but fuses it with a pagan Greek myth. That hybridization, classical pagan mixed with Christian morality, is exactly what these 19th century fraternities were doing it, and they dressed it up as philanthropy. But underneath, it's pagan mystery symbolism. And of course, the Knights of Pythias initiation has 3 degrees, just like Masonic craft degrees. Their ritual texts are full of ordeals, secrecy oaths, symbolic tests, modeled right on Freemasonry, just framed with Demon and Pythias. The same symbols are all there too. The swords, the eyes, skulls, serpents, knightly vows. So is it really about friendship? Or is it about oath-keeping even under the threat of death? That's the real lesson. And now the so-called children's building makes more sense. They don't really explain it, but that 1897 book literally says that this building was intended to be a paradise for future knights and ladies of Tennessee. So right there in plain sight, they're nodding to secret societies grooming the next generation. And now let's go back to the Parthenon. Because once you see the Knights of Pythias sitting there with their fraternal lodge next to the pyramid, the Greek temple starts to make a lot more sense. Remember, the official story is, oh, it's just because Nashville wanted to be the Athens of the South. It was culture and education. Right. That's the surface story. But anyone who's looked into Freemasonry knows how obsessed they were with Greek temples, with Athena, with the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and war. The Parthenon in Athens was literally a temple of initiation for the Eleusinian and Panathenaic rites. It's tied to processions, mystery plays, and the elevation of the initiate. Freemasonry borrows directly from these ancient models. Their whole craft imagery is temple building, columns, Doric and Ionic orders, secret chambers. So why build a Parthenon in the middle of a Christian city in 1897? Athena isn't just some random goddess. In esoteric terms, she represents hidden knowledge and the guiding intelligence behind the initiatory path. That's why she's paired with serpents on her shield, just like the Python at Delphi. And it doesn't stop there. So I'm reading through this Images of America book, and there's some weird details in here. Well, for one, the Director General of the fair was Eugene Kastner Lewis. Now, I can't find clear evidence that he was a Freemason, but it's pretty obvious he had Masonic ties. Here's his grave. He has a pyramid guarded by a pair of sphinx, which is referencing the Memphis Rite. Look, here's a Scottish Rite website explaining how the sphinxes symbolize the pillars. So the literal director of the Nashville World Fair was associated with secret societies? Why don't they teach that? That would be cool to know. But there's more. They have a photo in this book that talks about how they were simulating American war battles, which I find bizarre, because apparently these secret society members were role-playing. But August 12th was a day chosen to reproduce the Custer Massacre. The US cavalry troops attacked and were defeated by a large contingent of the improved order of red men who played the Indians in the battle. End quote. Not sure what that's all about and what they were shooting with, but to me I find it strange because it's almost like they're telling you that this is a play between brothers. So yeah, there were multiple secret societies here. Here is the Beehive of the Maccabees. If you don't know, the beehive is a Masonic symbol. Basically, a bunch of secret societies had their own little building here, like the Order of the Hoo-Hoo, Brothers of Friendship, and the Sisters of the Mysterious Ten. Here's the Red Man's little building. Oh, and I thought this was weird. They had this building at the Vanity Fair that says, quote, where visitors would come sit down for refreshments at a table made from a real coffin. Hanging above were skull and bone chandeliers. After being entertained with illusions of death and horror, the visitor was led down a long dark tunnel into a room with bright lights, white satin drapes from floor to ceiling, and people singing in angelic voices behind the curtain. The visitor had been taken on a journey from hell into heaven. End quote. What? That sounds like a literal death and rebirth initiation ritual. Oh, and supposedly they had clowns and stilts here. This is interesting. They had this massive record-holding tree that was 70,000 pounds, the largest popular tree on record, and over 600 years old. That's kind of cool, but I was looking at the photo, and the way this guy is putting his arm over the tree is kind of weird. You see the shadow under his arm, but behind his body there's no shadow at all. And the sky was cut out here, as you can see with the cables right here. I don't know why they would fake this, I'm just pointing out that it looks like it was edited. Another little interesting fact about the fair is they had this Athena statue with this Phrygian cap in front of the Parthenon that apparently was the largest statue ever sculpted by a woman. I mean, I'm not saying it's not true, but that seems like PR. But yeah, apparently they sculpted this in France, shipped it on a steamboat to New Orleans, and then brought it to Nashville on train. Now this Vanity Fair, this looks like temporary structures, like a real fair. I don't think anyone would have an issue with the narrative if all the buildings looked like this. There would be no conspiracy. So did they really build all this? And what exactly might have been faked? Look, I think we should just be open to the idea that maybe they're not telling us everything about the World's Fair, and just start there. We've already established that there are some weird things that don't add up. No construction photos, barely any photos of large crowds of people. There should be hundreds, even thousands if we're being honest. That's ignoring all the obvious photo manipulation. So wait, are we really supposed to believe they built all of this in less than 2 years? The reason I wanted to leave Tartaria out of this is because alternative history channels usually jump straight to these buildings were already here and repurposed. And yes, I do think that some of these structures were repurposed. But even those channels don't really question the World's Fair narrative itself. Did millions of people really go? Did it really last as long as they claim? Just because the Chicago World's Fair might have happened on the scale that we're told, does that automatically mean Nashville did? Chicago was a huge city with rail hubs and international press. Nashville wasn't. And here's where it gets interesting. I could easily see that the Nashville elite and Freemasons, watching what's going on with these big World's Fairs and wanting to compete to bring Nashville up to the same standard as those cities. But without the money or infrastructure to actually run something on that scale. Instead, they took an existing estate with colonial architecture and other structures already in place and basically created a fake press event, a World's Fair in name and photographs to give the illusion of a grand exposition. I'm not saying no buildings existed or that no fair took place, but the way it's presented to us, 6 months, 1.6 million visitors, dozens of grand halls, looks a lot more like a PR stunt. And not just that, I do think they actually had the ability to fake buildings if they wanted to. The first clue was all the photo manipulation, but as I was researching the state pavilions, I came across something interesting. One of the state exhibits flat out admitted it was a miniature replica, built to a fraction of the scale of the original building, which proves they were comfortable blurring the line between real architecture and scaled showpieces. The building erected by the state of Illinois is a miniature reproduction of the administration building at the World's Fair, Chicago. It's built to exactly 1/6 the scale of the original and was used as headquarters for Illinois visitors. The same statuary that adorned the administration building at Chicago, through the kindness of the curators of the Columbia Museum, was used to adorn the Illinois building at the Tennessee Centennial Exposition. This exquisite structure supposedly was in full view of the Rialto and the Parthenon. So I thought that was crazy because this basically proves they were working with miniatures. This was a real building. They do have a few photos of it, but I'm not exactly sure where the structure was. It's not on the bird's eye view that I can see. You're supposed to be able to see it from the Parthenon, and we know it was close to water, but I don't see it marked anywhere. And really take the time to look at this bird's eye view. Look at the Commerce Building, which they say was made for liberal arts. Right. And look at the Skytram. There's literally no way they did this in 2 years in 1897. There are also many more details on the map that don't show up on photos. A few more structures near the Parthenon, the strange compass-looking symbol in front of it. It's crazy to really look at everything they supposedly built for this World's Fair. But how do we even know this Illinois building was at the fair? I don't see any photos of it in the background of other shots. All the photos are close-ups of just the building itself. I think the Illinois building exposes two things. One, they could build miniatures if they needed to. And two, this is a PR stunt because it's basically promoting the Chicago World's Fair at the same time. It's like cross-branding, showing that the fairs are connected, so when people look back in history books, they think, oh look honey, they made a replica of the administration building, cementing the idea that all of this grandeur was actually built. But again, how do we know for certain? And what was the purpose of this event? To make money? They supposedly spent $1 million on the whole thing, about $34 million today, and they broke even? It literally says, unlike other World's Fairs, the Nashville World's Fair didn't lose money. They made a direct profit of less than $50. Oh, how convenient. They didn't even make any money, just to show off technological advancements and build an entire white city? Okay, when has that ever been done in the last 40 years? Sure, there have been a few World's Fairs recently, but they don't even compare to these international expositions from the late 19th century. And are we just going to ignore how everything was demolished? Go look at the 1982 Knoxville World's Fair. If it's so easy, why can't we do it again? They built like 2 buildings for the Knoxville Fair, and nothing that even compares to these older World Fairs. I don't get it. If it's so easy to use wooden frames and staff, why not just do something like that again? I mean, wasn't Trump saying that he was going to bring the World's Fairs back? Yeah, well, when I see them build something to this degree, a grand white city in less than 2 years, then I'll start to believe the mainstream narrative. And that's with modern technology. I don't even think they could do it in that timeline, honestly. And many others who are experienced in construction will tell you the same thing. The weird thing is, so they basically would have guests come to the fair, and there was this Bureau of Information, where you would get led to your designated headquarters building. If this was a fair, why did they need to escort visitors? So I don't buy the story at all, and I really don't see any evidence that it happened the way we've been told. Remember, we're being sold a narrative, and a narrative needs evidence to back itself up. And there just isn't enough here. All we're doing is picking holes in the story. I'm not here to present alternative theories as 100% truth, but to show people a template for questioning the official narrative. How do we actually know this World's Fair even happened the way they said it did? Again, the why doesn't matter at first. The first step is to establish, is this even a legit story? And did it really happen? And right now it doesn't look like we're being told the full story. And we just went over the secret society connections to the World's Fairs. If you haven't seen Tomorrowland, there's literally a movie about a breakaway civilization of Freemasons recruiting initiates at the World's Fair. That's not proof, but it shows you this isn't something I just made up. Other people see it too. And still, no local historian can explain why Nashville's World's Fair featured a pagan temple dedicated to Athena, or what the purpose was behind this Egyptian pyramid. They don't cover the secret society connections at all. So what we have is a supposedly massive historical event in Nashville, promoted and planned by secret society members, who then released a PR-approved set of photos that doesn't feel organic at all. It feels artificial and staged, and any real event of this size would have hundreds of family photos and views from every angle. None of that exists. And don't forget about the photo manipulation. What's all that about? If they were faking photos, then who knows? Did they fake entire buildings? Did they fake newspaper accounts? If you're still thinking, why would they do this? Remember, that's not an argument. We can discuss why, but that's theorizing. Nobody knows for sure. We weren't there. We only have the data that's been left over. But if you want some whys without Tartaria, here's one. They could simply be lying about the timeline, the donors involved, and the true purpose behind these World's Fairs. You see the same symbols, Hermes, pagan gods, and almost all these advertisements for these fairs around the world. That's not a coincidence. These weren't just random local projects like some town saying, hey, let's do our own World's Fair. No, these were clearly international projects. That's where you get into secret societies and their influence over the history of America. We're sold a story of colonialism and European settlers randomly setting up boom towns. But what if that's a lie? What if the entire thing wasn't random at all, but an orchestrated plan to move people into pre-prepared, controlled societies? Again, I'm of the opinion that many of these structures were already here and repurposed, but I'm just explaining a potential why without bringing in Tartaria. These World's Fairs were basically designed to prepare the population for a new age. That's why they were giant expos of presenting supposed future technology. Radios, TVs, electricity, cameras, home appliances. They gathered all the aspects of civilization under one event to present what this new world was going to look like. It's almost like, hey, here's what our state and city can do. Here's how we can contribute to the brotherhood kind of thing. So Nashville saw other cities like San Francisco and Chicago doing this, wanted to compete, didn't have the same means to pull off an actual international event, so they faked it. Now just to be clear, I'm not saying literally every aspect of this event was fake. I do think some of these structures were here and that they even did some construction for this event, possibly even the pyramid. That feels very Masonic. Some of the smaller pavilions I can believe were built in 2 years, but the Parthenon, the Commerce Building, a lot of this looks like it was already part of an older estate, converted into a fairground, with a few new buildings added on top. But that doesn't mean the event itself happened like they said.
Well, let me ask y'all right quick before we proceed. What do y'all think? Y'all think the narrative is wrong? Y'all think the structures was already here? What do y'all think? I need y'all to let me know. All right, I need y'all to let me know. Let's get back into it.
A new reality, a false illusion. Look, here's how it was literally promoted. This is a special edition of the Nashville American newspaper showing Lady Tennessee rising up out of the ashes of the war between the states in the Reconstruction period, leading the New South in the next century. She is literally a phoenix. And I noticed here it says ruin. So from the ruins, this new city rises. And I'm not sure what this bag is, but to me, it looks like an old camera with a strap. Why would you add that? Okay, so that's the Nashville World's Fair. Now let's dive into the history of Nashville a little bit and see how this all connects. Because if we can establish that there's something not adding up with the whole World's Fair narrative, then the next step is to question other aspects of Nashville's history. When we go back before the settlers ever showed up, the official story tells us that this land was the hunting ground of the Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Shawnee, and that it wasn't really heavily settled by any one group, more of a crossroads where tribes passed through. But then you start to hear about these massive mound sites just outside the city, places like the earthworks at Old Stone Fort, or the mounds at Mound Bottom on the Harpeth River. And according to the mainstream,
right, and there's tons of information out there on that. As a matter of fact, let me go to this particular set of literature that we got for you guys. Now, this is from the Ancient History, or the Annals of Kentucky, with the survey of the ancient monuments of North America, a tabular view of the principal languages and primitive nations on the whole earth. In this particular segment that we got highlighted for you right here, it states Tennessee, this state, is anciently united with Kentucky, and its monuments are very important to our history. On the Old South Forks, the Forest Case River, several towns, and several towns in the Tahawkee Mounds are the finest pyramids in the United States. Is right there. You understand that? The most finest pyramids in the United States is located in the state of Tennessee. And by the way, this is the Library of Congress book, and this book was also published in 1824. Family, 1824. this book was published. So that's just to go against the narrative that they even thought about constructing those pyramids.
Version, these were built by what they call the Mississippian culture between 800 and 1500 AD, basically long before your
Right, the Mississippian culture. Now look, this is what they're saying the Mississippian built.
The walls are way more imposing than the display suggests. And I'm sorry, I'm not buying their neat little storyboards about why archaeology is important. Like they know what they're talking about. These digs are tightly controlled, and anything that doesn't match the official narrative never makes it to the public. It's honestly laughable that they even pretend those stage boards are giving us the truth. They find pipes or arrowheads around the site, and somehow that proves who the builders were. Those could easily just belong to later groups who passed through, settlers or native tribes who came into the region after the fact. Artifacts tells you someone was there, not who engineered 50 acres of stone walls. And there's another thing about this that's kind of weird, because as you walk along the mound path, you'll see all these stone ruins, and some of them are actually kind of impressive. But the official excuse is that settlers in the early 1800s just built a bunch of mills on top of the ancient walls. They don't bother to detail what kind of mills or why there are so many ruins clustered around. They just wave it off and leave it at that. And of course they throw in that the early settlers were naive. They thought it was a fort, but they were mistaken because they didn't understand the origins. Oh really, they didn't? Well, let's dig into that, because that's where things get interesting. So I'm kind of shocked they even included this in the museum, but at the same time it makes perfect sense, because they know people are going to stumble on this history eventually, so they bring it up just enough to brush it off, like, oh, those silly settlers didn't know what they were talking about. Right, so they have this board in the museum that flat out says, why is it called Old Stone Fort? Which tells you this is probably the question they've gotten every single day. And here's the crazy part. They actually tell you the truth, but they do it in this sneaky way where they can control the framing. Basically saying that in the early 1800s, maybe even earlier, settlers came across this place and the Europeans did not believe Native Americans built it. Notice that phrasing there, did not believe, like it was an opinion. I'm pretty sure a lot of these guys were absolutely certain based on what they were seeing. But then the museum text flips it and says those settlers thought the enclosure was built by earlier expeditions of Europeans to protect themselves from Native Americans. So literally the opposite narrative. This was a fort to keep the native tribes out, not a ceremonial space for them. And it doesn't stop there. They list the myths right there on the board. Vikings, Welsh explorers, DeSoto soldiers, and even the lost tribe of Israel. And then they say, over the last few decades, archaeologists have verified that Native Americans of the Middle Woodland period built these wall mounds. Oh, case closed. Archaeologists got it all figured out, right? For hundreds of years, everyone called this a fort. But no, they were all just mistaken. Nothing to see here, move along. They literally think you're dumb enough to buy that every early observer was just confused. But wait, it gets better. Because they actually show a copy of an 1824 map of Old Stone Fort's walls, and the thing is drawn like a castle, with walls and gates. How do you just mess that up? Oh, they imagined it. Got it. And even the old state historical sign used to mention the Welsh explorer story. But of course, they removed that. And the thing is, we've seen the same pattern at other sites. Fort Mountain, Georgia, the Moon-Eyed People, is the same cover-up story. While it was believed for hundreds of years to be a fortification, archaeologists have concluded it was ceremonial. Okay, sure, they can kind of get away with that for Fort Mountain because it's smaller, but it's honestly insane they were able to pull it off with Old Stone Fort. And here's why. There's just too much information written about it in the early 1800s to ignore, like an actual paper trail of what people saw and thought back then. So let's go through some of it because it's about to get pretty wild. So let's just remember, the museum narrative today is that this was a ceremonial enclosure built by a woodland culture 1500 to 2000 years ago. No defensive use, definitely not a fort, And they framed the early settlers as these naive guys who just called it a fort because they supposedly didn't understand ritual earthworks. The earliest detailed account goes back to 1810, a letter that ran in the Democratic Clarion and Tennessee Gazette out of Nashville. And this is crazy because it's an eyewitness writing down exactly what he saw. Not rumors, not hearsay. He walked the site and described it in detail. And he doesn't call it an enclosure or a mound. He straight up calls it a stone fort or fortification. Multiple times. Now here's what blows my mind. Why is this not in the museum? I mean, this is the first written description of Old Stone Fort. You'd think it'd be front and center. But instead, what do they give us? One tiny board that just says the settlers thought it was a fort, and they were wrong. And that's it. And even if you look online, the only place that even talks about this letter is the Duck River Agency. And all they say is that it mentions the entrance walls and the canal. That's it. They don't give you the whole thing. They don't walk you through what that guy actually wrote. There are a few websites out there that do question what Old Stone Fort really is, calling it mysterious. Some say maybe it was built by someone else, maybe Europeans, but none of them actually give you the first real printed descriptions that we have of this place. And that's where things get interesting. The newspaper itself is old and damaged and very hard to read, but I went through it line by line and transcribed the full thing so we can finally see it in the way it was originally written. Now, I'm not going to read every single word here because it's long, but I'll put it on the screen. I'll show you the screenshots of the original so that you can pause and read it yourself if you want to. So let's break this down, because what we've got here is an eyewitness not only calling it a stone fort, but describing it as way more massive and impressive than what we see today. He talks about pillars, parallel walls, a canal, and the bluffs themselves being used as natural defenses. He's describing a full military-style design, not some vague ceremonial ground. This is the first description ever written down, and it doesn't line up with the museum story at all. The first thing that stands out in this newspaper account is that the guy opens right away calling it a stone fort or fortification. And he doesn't say it once, he repeats it several times as he goes along. This was someone who actually walked it, measured it, and wrote down what he saw. The details are very specific. He describes pillars at the entrance with two parallel walls running inside for a stretch and then making a sharp turn. He talks about the bluffs on either side serving as walls. He points out a valley ditch cutting through and even mentions what looks like a canal running between the river forks. He's describing defensive features. That's what he saw when it was still standing taller and clearer than it is today. He also gives numbers, saying about 35 acres inside the walls and 100 acres between the forks, with the walls in places reaching up to 10 feet in height. And that's in 1810, before another 2 centuries of erosion and trees and roots covering everything up. So we're getting this record of the fort when it was in way better shape, and it's detailed enough that you can actually picture it as a functioning stronghold, not some mound in the woods. And then he makes his point about the purpose. He says it couldn't have been for refuge because the land around was barren and couldn't support that many people. So he rules that out, and instead, he says the most reasonable explanation is that the place was built to secure a treasure. A treasure? What kind of treasure? So the first description of Old Stone Fort that was ever printed isn't talking about ceremonies or solstices or anything like that. It's talking about a massive fortified complex built to guard something valuable that was hidden there. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because after laying out the walls and the entrance, he starts building this theory that maybe there was a reason for all of it, and he points straight to the ground itself, saying that there are heavy deposits of metal here. And that changes everything, because if metallurgy is involved, then the whole woodland culture ceremony story falls apart. He writes that at the falls, there's an inexhaustible quantity of copperous ore strongly impregnated with alum, stretching along the bluff. And that's a big deal because copperous is iron sulfate, which was used back then for dyeing cloth, making ink, tanning leather, and alum was used for tanning and fixing dyes too, even for medicine. So these were important industrial materials. And he goes so far as to speculate that if the process of extracting and separating them was properly understood, this one site alone could supply the Western world. That's how much he thought was here. But then he adds that the demand for those materials wouldn't have been enough to justify the massive works of the fort. So he rules out the idea that it was just a mine, which means there had to be something more to it. And then he describes something even stranger. Because opposite of the copperous deposits in the river bottom, he says there's a body of a mysterious black rock with veins of ore that look like rich metal when they're pulled out. And he says when you put it to fire, it doesn't melt down into usable metal. It just gets consumed or evaporated. And he admits that he can't identify it, but he suggests that if a proper chemical search was made, maybe something valuable could be extracted from it. And by the time he wraps up his letter, he makes it clear where he stands. The place is way too big and too strong to be some kind of refuge. He rules that out. He also looks at the copperas and alum deposits and says that couldn't justify such a massive construction either. And in his own words, he calls it the most reasonable conjecture that it was built to secure some great treasure. And what really stands out is what he doesn't say. He never once mentions ceremony or ritual. It's not even on his radar. The whole ceremonial enclosure idea didn't exist in 1810. That came later when archaeology rewrote the story. But for the people standing there at that time, looking at the walls and the layout, the only way they could make sense of it was as a fortress, guarding something valuable. And right after that, he notes that settlers were already planning mills, ironworks, tanneries, and a distillery right on this land. Because even then, it was seen as industrially valuable, not ceremonial, not symbolic, tied directly to resources in the ground. Remember what the museum said? These people during the early 1800s were just confused, right? Well, let's look at another reference. From John Haywood's 1823 book, The Natural and Aboriginal History of Tennessee. Keep in mind, while many will dismiss Haywood as promoting the civilized mound builder theory, I never hear historians actually discuss some of the findings and evidence presented in the book. I mean, John Haywood is considered to be the father of Tennessee history. So what does he have to say about the stone fort? He flat out calls it the stone fort, and he gives a very detailed description of it. Not a vague outline. He says it sits between two forks of Duck River and covers about 30 to 35 acres. The walls are made of stone, and in some places are 16 to 30 feet thick at the base, and 4 to 5 feet wide on the top. He describes gateways, ditches, excavations, bluffs being used as natural walls, and he even mentions stone buildings inside. So this is not a ceremonial earth enclosure like the museum wants you to picture. This is a serious structure. And he also notes that when Captain Eastland plowed through the land inside the fort, he turned up a piece of a glass bowl and a carved stone. And Haywood specifically says the workmanship was superior to anything made by the Indians. Which is huge because it tells us straight up they were thinking about that question 200 years ago. They were asking who built this, and they were not convinced that the tribes living there at the time were capable of doing this. They looked at the evidence in their hands and said, nope, that doesn't line up. This looks like the work of somebody else entirely. Then he adds that when they cut down a tree that was growing out of one of the fort's walls in 1819, it had 357 rings, meaning the wall had been standing for many centuries before settlers even got there. And he also mentions that a lot of the stone in the wall was slate copperous ore, which ties right back into that mineral and industry angle we talked about earlier from that newspaper account. But Haywood doesn't stop there. He uses this to start building a much bigger case. He talks about other fortifications across Tennessee. He brings up skeletons of a giant race found near Sparta that were said to be 7 feet tall. He mentions Roman coins being found on the Elk River, coins of Antoninus from the year 137 AD, coins of Commodus, even a Richard III medal, all of which he believed pointed to contact with the old world. And he links it all together by saying there must have been a civilized race here long before the tribes that were living in Tennessee. A people who had masonry, metallurgy, and left behind bricks, coins, and tools.
Did he say what book this was from? I stepped away. Did he say what book this was from? Because I believe this is from the Natural Aboriginal History of Tennessee, and it talks about some coins being made here. I actually got this book. I think if that's what he's reading, I'm not for sure. If y'all can let me know, that'd be fantastic. Y'all let me know. in the chat. Somebody said, oh, I don't know. Let me see if I can find something. All right, I'm gonna just let it continue. I'm gonna see if I can find it in my book.
Haywood even takes it a step further. He's talking about the giant skeletons near Sparta, and he straight up says that they were probably Scythians. Which is fascinating because Tartaria was ancient Scythia according to many old maps. So here, the so-called father of Tennessee history in 1823 is literally suggesting that the builders of these massive works in Tennessee weren't Indians at all, but a branch of a lost race of Scythian Tartarians. Then he adds to this with strange artifacts, like a circular stone
In the book, they refer to them as mound builders.
owned by a General Koch in Granger County, about 3 inches across, perfectly smooth and polished, carved with indentations on both sides like it had been made for the hand. And he said it must have been cut with an iron or steel tool. And he describes another one in a Nashville ladies collection, made of glittering white stone, just as perfectly carved, and another one taken from a mound in Maury County, a perfectly globular polished stone, painted with unfading dyes, and made of material not native to Tennessee, which he says must have been brought from abroad. And none of that fits the idea of a woodland culture with no metallurgy and no foreign contact. These are precision artifacts that he's saying were cut with metal instruments. And then comes maybe the most shocking part, because Haywood includes accounts of mummies found in Tennessee caves, not native skeletons like the museum would have you believe, but actual preserved bodies with very different features. He talks about a skeleton near Carthage with yellow hair, another in White County wrapped in a feather mantle with fine yellow hair, and then a sealed cave on the Cumberland River where they found 3 bodies, a man, woman, and child sitting in cane baskets with fair white complexions, blue eyes, auburn hair, and fine delicate stature about the same size as European settlers of Haywood's time. The man was wrapped.
Hey, now what he's getting into is the theory that King Arthur II and Madoc made a voyage over here and end up getting into some beef in Tennessee and then running through Kentucky where they was eventually unalive. Okay, the Annuals of Tennessee. I got that book, but it also mentions this because listen, there's something that's unique that I just read in this other book that I want to kind of, display as well. Hold on. Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. And I got to pull this up right quick. Hold on. Let me get to it. All right. So look, let me pull this up. And this is from the Natural and Aboriginal History of Tennessee. Let me go to this right here. This is from the Natural Aboriginal History of Tennessee. This book was written in 1768, by the way. I mean, no, it's not written in 1868. My bad. It's written in 1849. Excuse me. But right here it says about the year 1819, in digging a cellar at Mr. Morris's house in Fayetteville on the Elk River, which falls into Tennessee, and about 200 yards from the creek, which empties into the Elk, and not far from the ruins of a very ancient fortification on the creek, was found a small piece of silver coin of size, a 9-penny piece, right? It is on one side of the coin. It is the image of an old man projected considerably from the superficies of a large Roman nose. His head covered apparently with a cap and curled hair with Roman letters. So they found this in Tennessee in the old fortification mound. They said that the date went back to the 1500s. So, and it couldn't have been DeSoto because he didn't come till later on. So, Look, they saying that this coin is very important fact in the intercourse of the ancient people at this particular time. Yeah, man, it's pretty deep, man. When you get into some of this ancient Aboriginal history of Tennessee, man, it go deep. But man, y'all hit that like button, man. Y'all bogus as hell for not for supporting the channel, man. We rocking out though. So salute to everybody that's in the building. We got a lot more to get
14
into.
deer skins with bark woven blankets around them, and he makes it clear these did not belong to the Indians of the present day. So when you really go through Haywood's book, you see that it's not just him repeating some mound builder myth, he's actually stacking evidence. Old Stone Fort is described as a fortress with massive stone walls, artifacts cut with metal tools and made of foreign stone, Roman coins and medals showing up in the rivers nearby, and even mummies with fair skin and blue eyes found in caves. And when you put it all together, it paints a picture completely different than the museum's ceremonial narrative. It shows that in the early 1800s, the people closest to these discoveries believed Tennessee had once been home to a lost and very different race who built strongholds like Old Stone Fort and left behind physical evidence that still doesn't add up today. Now let's talk about the maps. First, let's start with what the museum says, because on the plaque, it calls this a 50-acre enclosure. And the way they present it is that the whole outer mound wall is the Old Stone Fort. And if you look at the 3D model they have, it shows the same thing but clearer, which is helpful because the old maps don't line up with this version. The older account actually says about 32 acres, and they show a wall going right through the middle of this area. The earliest map is the Donison map from 1819, and while it's a little rough to make out, you can still see the layout. Then in 1821, Rafinesque draws another map, and this one makes it very obvious. The wall isn't just around the outside like the museum shows today, it's cutting across the center of the fort itself, dividing the space, and that's a very different picture. And by 1848, we get the version published in Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley by Squire and Davis. And once again, the map shows the wall going through the middle, which means this wasn't a one-off error or imagination. Multiple independent surveys were recording the same thing, but today that dividing wall is nowhere to be found. And Squire and Davis don't just give us the map, they also add some very interesting details in their description of the site. Details that don't really match how the museum presents it now. So Squire and Davis come along in 1848. And this is interesting because this is the very first publication of the Smithsonian Institution. And they don't put Old Stone Fort under ceremonial sites. No, they put it under defensive works. They describe an enclosure of about 32 acres, not 50, with walls 16 feet thick at the base, narrowing to 5 feet on top, and standing 8 to 10 feet tall, built from stones gathered all across the surrounding country, and in some places reinforced with a layer of earth 1 to 2 feet thick. At the north entrance, they record 2 conical stone mounds that may have served as watchtowers. And just behind that entrance, they describe 2 separate stone buildings, one 16 feet square, the other 10. Rough stone, but deliberate construction. Now remember what the museum says. They wave off the stone ruins around the site as mills from the 1800s. But these are stone structures inside the wall, mapped in 1848 as part of the original work. And they're not mills. They're a part of a fortified complex. They also note ditches on the south side, one 20 feet wide and 6 to 8 feet deep, and another even bigger, 70 to 80 feet wide and up to 30 feet deep. The material from those ditches was likely thrown onto the walls, but the ditches themselves acted as moats, another defensive feature. And some observers at the time thought there were passages with steps leading down to Duck River, so the people inside could still get water if they were under attack. And then they come right out and say it. The whole thing was chosen with a military eye. That's not my phrase. That's the Smithsonian's. They also point out that within a mile of the fort are 2 massive oblong mounds, 20 to 25 feet high, 80 to 100 feet long, built with the same precision as other ancient works and covered with full-grown forest trees. So we're not talking about anything recent here. So compare that to the museum story today. Ceremonial enclosure, 50 acres, no defensive use. But the Smithsonian Founding Survey says 32 acres, towers, stone buildings, walls, moats, water access, and a military layout. Now I want to bring up something interesting, because it's not just me digging around in old newspapers here. Academics have actually studied this place and written about it, and the only one that I could really find is C. Ward Weems. He put out a piece through the Duck River Agency, and he does exactly what you'd expect from a modern archaeologist. He acknowledges all the old sources, but immediately neutralizes them. So for example, Mitchell in 1810 calls it a canal. Donison in 1819 calls it a ditch. Dr. Stith in 1820 talks about it in his address. Raffinesque maps it in 1821. Joachim in 1845 shows it, and Squire and Davis mention it in 1848. So we're talking about 6 different independent accounts, all describing the same feature. But Weems says, well, it couldn't have held water because one end is 20 or 30 feet above the river today, so it's just a ditch, not a canal. Okay, fine, maybe it didn't carry water in the way Mitchell imagined, but that doesn't take away the fact that it's still a massive trench running along the back of the wall. In some places 70 or 80 feet wide and 20 to 30 feet deep, which is exactly what you'd expect from a defensive earthwork. So instead of asking why it's there, Weems just downgrades it to ceremonial, which to me doesn't make any sense, because who's cutting a 30-foot deep trench for ceremony? He even brings up Alexander Coxus in 1870, who described an ancient stone dam that might have backed up water into the canal. But when Coxus went back later, he couldn't find it again, so Weems dismisses it. But think about that. If a dam really was there and later destroyed or eroded, then Mitchell's Canal makes sense after all. That's the problem with the way modern archaeology handles this. They take the present-day river elevation and project it backwards as if the landscape never changed, when even the early accounts noticed erosion changing the site profile. And what Weems doesn't really acknowledge is the bigger picture, that the ditch lines up perfectly with what you'd expect from a fortification. Ditches next to walls, moats cut deep for defense, passages leading to the river. All of that matches what Haywood described, what Squire and Davis recorded, what the early maps show. The consistency is overwhelming, and yet the museum today won't even mention the ditch on their plaques, let alone call it a defensive feature. The official cover-up happened in 1966, when the University of Tennessee comes in and runs formal excavations. They radiocarbon dated the site to somewhere between 80 and 550 AD. They say the walls were built of riverstone faced with earth, and they reframed the whole thing as ceremonial, with the entrance aligned to the solstice, and that becomes the official baseline we're given today. The state encyclopedia even says those older ideas of Vikings, Welsh, DeSoto, or lost tribes were shattered by these 66 excavations. So just like that, 150 years of calling this a fort, including the Smithsonian's own first publication, gets wiped away and replaced with ceremonial enclosure. End of story. And the thing is, the giant stories never really went away. Haywood wrote in 1823 about skeletons in this very region, the Duck and Elk River valleys, and he wasn't vague. He said they were 7 feet tall and up, found in stone graves and caves near Sparta, just a short ride from Old Stone Fort. The Cherokee Phoenix even ran a piece in 1828 talking about skeletons from 7 to 9 feet in White County, which again is the same area. By the late 1800s, you see it in the newspapers too. Locals are still finding jawbones that didn't fit a normal face, thigh bones that reached past a man's knee, skulls that slipped over a full-grown man's head. And some of these were dug right out of mounds and old walls around Nashville and Duck River. That wasn't a fringe idea. People genuinely thought there was a race of giants buried under these Tennessee earthworks, and Old Stone Fort was right in the middle of that conversation. Now, whether giants built Old Stone Fort or not, there is something about this place that feels magical. So as you're walking the trail, there's this spot where you can drop down to the water near the waterfalls, and there's even a sign that says above wall and below wall. I tried to film it so you can get a sense of the scale, but it's kind of hard to see where it ends, so we went down by the waterfall, and I'm just looking around at these rock formations, and you tell me what you think. Because some of these boulders by the river look like slabs, they're layered like brickwork, and sure, maybe you could argue that's natural. But then, if you keep walking down towards the big fall, when you face it and look to the left, there's a section of the wall that's clearly man-made. It's an old stone wall. And the thing is, they'll probably tell you that this is one of the mills, but it doesn't look like that. It's buried into the mound itself, and it looks way older. And standing at that waterfall, I realized the water's coming straight out from inside the earth. which makes me think it's hollow under there. And then right at the base, I noticed something crazy. Fine, precise stonework, almost too perfect. And yeah, maybe it could be natural, but to me it looks advanced. And if you look carefully, you see these cube-like formations, straight edges, right angles. You can't miss it. And again, I'll admit, yes, that does happen in nature sometimes. But here we're talking about whether this really is an ancient fortress. And when you've got these man-made walls right next to geometric stone blocks at a waterfall that's pouring out of the earth, I mean, it makes you wonder. What's funny is they say all those mills that were here were wooden. The plaque even shows a sad photo of a little wooden hut. Yet you walk around the site, and there are these heavy stone ruins that don't match at all. They're much more impressive. They look older, and it makes you question if they're really just mills or they're a part of something much bigger that's been written off. Okay, so now that I've broken that down and you've seen some of the area, there's still a lot more here that we could look at. But from here, I want to go back to that board in the museum I mentioned earlier, because I was honestly surprised they even put this engraving up. But let's be real, the museum doesn't really provide much information on the original surveys or the history of the fort, which is strange because they easily could. Instead, they give you this one board with one map. And this is actually a rare map. I haven't seen anyone talk about it, and Weems only does so briefly. But let's talk about it. The way they frame it's pretty dismissive. The caption just says like, this 1824 map imagines the old stone fort's wall as a castle with high rock walls and gates. And that's it. No context, no author, no explanation, just look at this silly old map. But here's the thing. It's not just some random drawing. This is an actual engraved plate published in 1824 in Stockholm by a Swedish nobleman named Axel Leonhard Klinkelstrom. He traveled through the US in the late 1810s, documented what he saw, and when he went back home, he published a book of letters with an atlas of engravings. One of those plates was this exact piece, titled Ruins of an Old Fort in the State of Tennessee. It was engraved by C. Muller, intended to be clear and precise, meant to show Europeans what America's ancient ruins look like. So when the museum brushes it off as just imagining a castle, that's not really the story. Klinkelstrom wasn't imagining anything. He was documenting, and he chose to present Old Stone Fort as a fortress ruin, with walls and gates, with the falls as part of his design. This wasn't a local farmer mistaking piles of dirt. This was a European traveler publishing one of the first printed maps of the site, and calling it exactly what it looks like, a fort. And to me, it's really telling that the museum doesn't bother to give you the context, because once you actually know what this engraving is and where it came from, it stops looking like a fantasy and starts looking like a serious early testimony that the Old Stone Fort was always understood as a fortification. So I tried looking into Klinkelstrom's original source material, his actual letters from America, and the thing is, I couldn't find anywhere where he specifically talks about Tennessee or this fort. His atlas is where the engraving shows up. And that's what makes it so strange. Like, out of all the things he saw in America, he chose to publish a detailed engraving of Old Stone Fort? Why? It's not like he was doodling. This was a part of an official atlas he put together when he got back to Europe, showing ruins, cities, maps, and it was all meant to tell people what America was really like. So why did this site make the cut? Why did he present it as a fortress with walls and gates? There has to be a story there. Either someone told him about it, or he passed through the area and knew his reputation, or maybe it was already famous enough as a ruin to be worth including. But that's the point. There's a mystery here, and the museum totally sidesteps it. They just show the engraving and laugh it off as an imaginative picture, when in reality it's one of the first published European depictions of the place. And this is where I have to bring up Weems, because he does mention Klinkelstrom's map in his article, and instead he basically says we can't take it seriously because it doesn't show the back entrance or the ditch the way later surveys did. And that's his entire argument, that Klinkelstrom must have been wrong because he didn't capture those features. But that's not proof of anything. Absence doesn't equal imagination. Maybe he didn't have time to map every detail. Maybe he was working from a sketch. Maybe he just highlighted what he thought was most striking, the massive front walls and towers. But that doesn't erase the fact that he deliberately engraved it as a fortification. If anything, it shows how selective Weems is being, because he'll lean on Donison or Squire and Davis when they describe it as a ditch or canal, but as soon as someone presents the site as a more advanced fortress than the current narrative allows, suddenly it doesn't count. Suddenly it's just imagination. That's cherry picking, because you can't claim to be building a complete picture of Old Stone Fort while deliberately ignoring one of the earliest and most detailed engravings ever published of it. Okay, so you see this little area? This river to the left is Duck River. And on Klinklerstrom's map, it actually includes the waterfalls, which means I can show you exactly where I took that video. We were standing right here. That's Big Falls, the exact spot where I filmed the old stone wall. And that waterfall that looks like it's coming straight out of the earth, that's where this entrance was. And that's also where I saw those geometric rock formations that look like layered stones. Now, if this was really a fort, then it was insane. And it makes total sense why those early surveyors were blown away by it. And if you look closer at the map, he even includes the watchtower pillars at the entrance and those stone buildings. But another thing I find interesting is not one of these early accounts mentioned anything about the structure being aligned with the solstice. And that would be something they would look into, because a lot of these early researchers, like Haywood, were paying attention to mound sites and making comparisons. So if there was some big solar alignment at Old Stone Fort, you'd think they'd mention it. But they don't. Not in 1810, not in 1819, not in 1823, not in 1848. Nobody talks about a solstice sunrise. They talk about walls and gates and canals and fortifications. So this whole solar temple angle only really shows up after the 1966 excavation when the narrative shifts. And when you really think about it, the solstice claim feels kind of thin because it's based on one feature, the front entrance. While the rest of the site is massive, 50 acres with ditches, canals, and natural bluffs used as barriers, are we supposed to believe all that was built just to line up one gate with the sunrise one day a year? And even though it's not perfect, their own documents say it's within a fraction of a degree, but depending on where you stand, how the horizon looks, and how erosion has changed things over 2,000 years, you could probably make the same claim about a lot of structures. So what really is Old Stone Fort? I'd honestly like to hear other people's thoughts on this, especially if you're from the area, because I haven't really seen anyone push back on the museum like this, and I think these are some solid questions. Are we just supposed to take the archaeologist's word for it and never question it? Or is there more to this story that's being ignored? My opinion is, I think this was a massive ancient stone fort, and there's a reason they would want to cover it up. Because if that truth got out, it would completely break the neat little box they put American history into. It would prove there was an advanced civilization here long before the settlers and long before the tribes we know today. A civilization capable of building defensive works that even in the 1800s people looked at that and said, yeah, this is more advanced than anything we're building right now. Remember, these are early accounts talking about stone walls 8 to 10 feet high running for thousands of feet, parallel entrances, canals, stone buildings, and when they cut down the trees in 1819, they counted rings going back centuries. So we're talking about something that had been abandoned for ages. That's infrastructure, that's planning, that's engineering. And if that's the case, then the entire narrative that we've been sold about who was here and what they were capable of goes out the window. And maybe that's exactly why the story had to be flipped in the 1960s into a solstice temple, because the alternative is too disruptive to the version of history they want us to believe. I did want to mention one last thing. In that Squire and Davis book, Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley from 1848, right after they go over Old Stone Fort, they add this little detail. They say, quote, numerous other defensive works are represented to exist in Tennessee, but very few of them have been surveyed and described. In Bedford County, there is a stonework of considerable size, the walls of which are said to be from 16 to 20 feet wide at the base, and 4 to 5 feet wide on the top. Other works adjoin it. It is generally believed to have been erected by DeSoto, but in 1819, an oak tree standing on the wall was cut down, which exhibited 357 annual layers, and must consequently have been 78 years old when DeSoto landed in Florida. End quote. Now just think about that for a second, because what they're saying is Old Stone Fort wasn't even unique. There were other stone fortifications in Middle Tennessee, some of them with walls 20 feet thick, and they were old enough that when they cut down a tree growing on top of the wall in 1819, the rings went back almost 4 centuries. So there's no way this was a recent thing or anything tied to the colonial period. And yet, we never hear about these other sites today. They've basically vanished from the conversation, just like the early accounts of Old Stone Fort. And to me, that says there's a whole chapter of Tennessee's past that's been intentionally pushed aside. Which Haywood mentions this as well, and I was reading through this book, and I came across this really weird section. He starts talking about what he calls poisonous tracts of land in Tennessee. And this isn't just folklore. He describes in detail how in certain areas, when cattle grazed their milk, it would literally turn poisonous. If you drank it, you'd get sick and die. If you butchered the cow and ate the meat, it would kill you too. Even the dogs, buzzards, raccoons, and possums that fed on the carcasses dropped dead. Whole herds wiped out in these patches of land. And he says the symptoms were so specific, you could even tell by the greenish cream and smell of the milk. And the craziest part is he says one of these poison zones was along the Duck River in Bedford and Franklin counties, the exact same river system that the Old Stone Fort is built on. And in Sequatchie Valley, it got so bad that entire coves had to be fenced off by law in the 1850s to keep cattle out. Literally, the legislature had to pass an act because they couldn't figure out the cause, just admitting the land itself was poison. Now, today, the mainstream will tell you this was just white snake root, a weed with the toxin that passes into milk and meat, and sure, that explains some cases of this milk sickness. But in Haywood's book, he isn't describing a weed. He's describing whole landscapes where the very soil and rock seemed poisonous, where slate would blaze in fire, where sulfur and bitumen mixed in the hills, and he seems to tie it to specific geology. That doesn't sound like snake root. And in the same book, he's talking about Old Stone Fort and bringing up the possibility of metallurgy, strange ores, and even that black rock that looked like rich metals when burned. So what if this so-called poison land was from the ground itself, from mining activity, or smelting, or some kind of chemical runoff from ancient metallurgy? If this area was being used for industry, the soil and water could absorb the toxins, which would explain why animals feeding there got poisoned. Later in the book, Haywood is essentially laying out his belief that there was an advanced civilization living in this area, right along the Duck River. He's not vague about it either. He points to very specific finds, coins, tools, furnaces, and evidence of metallurgy, and ties them directly to the same rivers and counties where Old Stone Fort is on. He obviously didn't think this was a ceremonial site. He's kind of implying a bigger picture showing that this area had ancient commerce, technology, and contact far beyond what anyone admits today. Then he brings up the Bedford County Axe, which if this is true shatters the woodland area builders theory. In 1812, some men cut down a massive poplar tree on Garrison Fork of Duck River, over 5 feet thick, and inside, near the heartwood, they found the old mark of an axe. The chop had been made when the tree was just a sapling, centuries earlier. If the tree was 400 years when it was cut down, then that axe blow was struck long before Columbus or DeSoto ever set foot in America. Haywood takes this as proof that the people here were working with metal axes, either iron or hardened copper, long before Europeans. And he talks about silver buttons with deer and hounds engraved on them, dozens plowed up in Lincoln County, a furnace with coal and ash dug up in Davidson County in 1794, brass coins with Minerva iconography found near Murfreesboro. Haywood is showing this as evidence that a civilized, technologically skilled people had once lived and worked in this very region, the same Duck River system as Old Stone Fort. He talks about a skeleton found near Sparta that was buried with a necklace or chain made of over 200 ivory beads, and he points out the style was strikingly similar to ornaments from India and even connects it to Hebrew jewelry described in the Bible. Haywood says the material itself had to be foreign, real ivory, which means there was trade or outside contact. And what's wild is his final conclusion is that this was evidence of a people in Tennessee who were actually descendants of the Scythians and Goths from Roman times who had made their way into America. I actually have more to say about Haywood. There is some crazy stuff in that book and some other interesting sites in the area, but we're going to save that for a later section. Okay, now let's move on to the first supposed European settlers in the area. We're told the first non-native contact around here traces back to Hernando de Soto and his guys showing up looking for gold and land for Spain. Apparently they came right through East Tennessee, near an old creek-related town called Coosa. Historians still argue over the exact route. Every map is different. But most agree he came down through the mountains following river valleys. One of the Coosa settlements was literally called Little Egypt by archaeologists, which is interesting on its own, but the story we're given about De Soto just marching through hundreds of Indian cities across what should have been wilderness feels way too clean. We're told these native towns just welcomed the Spaniards in, fed them, housed them, let them stay for weeks. That might sound believable until you read the same sources describing them kidnapping guides, feeding people to dogs, burning villages on the way out, and somehow they still get invited to the next one. The Battle of Malvila supposedly killed 6,000 Indians against 600 Spaniards, which is an impossible ratio unless the numbers are exaggerated propaganda. Even if they had steel and horses, there's no way that many coordinated fights across that much territory could be happening with no collapse of their own supply line. And that supply line is where the story really falls apart. We're told they had 240 horses, dozens of dogs, and even a moving herd of pigs they used as a walking food bank. They had no resupply ports, just whatever corn and acorns they stole from towns they'd just burned. So picture it, armored conquistadors, horses, pigs, dogs, servants, slaves, all marching through Appalachian forest, somehow surviving for years. Just doesn't add up. And remember, we only have 3 main sources for any of this. Oviedo's version, or Rangel's diary, Viedma's shorter report, and The Gentleman of Elvis, an anonymous memoir published years later. Rangel was De Soto's secretary, so everything went through layers of editing. The details between them don't line up, and you can tell parts were cleaned up for royal approval. Elvis writes about chiefs who empty their own houses over 20 barns full of corn, calling De Soto their brother. And almost every chief does the same speech, word for word. It doesn't feel like reporting. In the same chapter, he says villagers at Guasili gifted them 300 dogs to eat. 300 from a single mountain town? Even if each household had 2, that's 150 houses worth of livestock in one meal. That would be impossible unless these towns were much larger than what we're told. They also say the Spaniards brought their own Irish wolfhounds and greyhounds, so now they're marching through forest with war dogs, eating other dogs, and feeding horses and pigs with dogs. So one moment everyone's calling each other brothers, next they're at war, they're burning villages and taking captives, but somehow always invited to dinner by the next chief. Then there's a part where there's a drought, and so they plant a cross and God sends a storm, which is clearly Catholic propaganda, a way to justify the mission. Right before that, there's this miracle translator, Juan Ortiz, who magically appears in the wilderness speaking the right languages. Oh, convenient timing. And there's one part where Elvis says there was a town where they were fed bear butter, walnut oil, and honey in gourds. They even note the honey was never seen again in the whole country. There were no European honeybees in North America yet. So what bees are they talking about? The only native ones that made honey like that were stingless tropical bees used by the Maya, which would mean long-distance trade from Central America. That completely breaks their own storyline of these being isolated mountain chiefdoms with no outside contact. Then there's this pearl story. The soldier carrying 6 pounds of pearls as big as hazelnuts. He got really tired and threw them away on the mountain, which was supposed to show his foolishness, but it sounds more like a moral lesson than something that actually happened on a military march. Pearls that size would mean there were massive fisheries running somewhere in the rivers here. Yet there's no sign of that. No piles of shells or trade debris. It just kind of reads like a parable that got folded into the history. They also seem to have the miracle of navigation, somehow pinpointing islands and towns with perfect accuracy across rivers and ridges without maps. Modern historians admit they're guessing the route. Even Charles Hudson's map is stitched together from vague leagues in the text. So the supposed GPS level certainty is just later reconstruction. A single interpreter doesn't explain that, especially if they're fighting every tribe they meet. And then there's the population. They describe hundreds of thriving towns full of thousands of people, elaborate food stores, trade goods like pearls and honey. But by the 1700s, explorers claim Tennessee was empty hunting ground. We're told disease wiped everyone out, 95% gone. But that number comes from later estimates, not eyewitnesses. So how advanced were these towns really? And where did everyone go? Even the archaeology can't match the scale the Spaniards bragged about. And finally, they all just vanish. De Soto dies, buried in the river, and the survivors just drift away. No campsites, no grave, no trail of metal armor or pig bones to mark 4 years of marching. Yes, there are scattered Spanish looking artifacts across the southeast, but few in Tennessee itself, and none that prove this exact story. Some of those metals might not even be Spanish. They could come from older metallurgical cultures, maybe the same people who built the stone forts and mound complexes long before Europeans. The DeSoto story feels like a legend to cover up that the Spanish were investigating whatever towns were thriving during this time, which seemed to be Creek and Cherokee towns. Around the same period, the Spanish world was buzzing with tales of rich inland kingdoms, the seven cities of Cibola, the island of California from the story of Esplandian, and rumors of gold cities hidden beyond the Gulf. It feels like DeSoto's march to the southeast was part of that same obsession, the search for lost wealth in ancient cities that the crown couldn't admit actually existed here. If they found advanced towns with architecture or metallurgy that didn't fit the narrative of primitive tribes, it makes sense they'd bury that under a story of conquest and divine mission. The next contact happens in 1682, when French explorer La Salle comes down the Mississippi, claiming the whole river for France. Somewhere along the Chickasaw Bluffs, one of his men disappears. So they stop, and they say they built a quick wooden fort called Fort Prodom. That's supposed to be the first European structure in West Tennessee, but nobody agrees on where it actually was. Some say the first bluff near Memphis, others say further upriver. Every historian puts it somewhere different. The fort never shows up again in records. No ruins, nothing, so who knows if it was real or perhaps it was a fort that was already there. Then about 30 years later, French traders start showing up around the Big Salt Spring, and this is what later would become downtown Nashville. By around 1710, they're running traps and trading at a place called French Lick. And by the 1760s, there's this French-Canadian guy named Timothy Demonbron. The locals pronounce it Demonbrian. It's spelled demon though. And he's supposedly storing up supplies in this cave on the river. The cave is still there supposedly. It's named after him. So the French were in what would become Nashville since the early 1700s. And this demon guy is remembered as the first resident of the city. But it's hard to know how much of that's real, and it's not really clear what they were living in. It's implied they must have been living in like log cabins or something. But finally in 1779, we get this Fort Nashboro. They aren't really clear about that because I highly doubt this is what they were living in or being used for military defense. So they've been here for 100 years now, technically, and we have nothing left. The one downtown is just a replica that's been rebuilt a few times over the years. I don't really see how something like that could have been a real trading post. And keep in mind, New Orleans was founded in 1718, so it's not hard to imagine there was already a lot more happening here than the story lets on. The French were building full cities along the Mississippi at this point, running trade routes that reached all the way up through the interior. So it doesn't make sense that this spot, sitting right on the river system, would have just been an empty campsite. So the story of Nashville kind of starts with Fort Nashboro, which again we have no remains of, and it just kind of disappears. The original was said to have 20 log cabins, but the site itself has like 6 different names: Fort Bluff, Bluff Station, French Lick Fort, etc. And again, there were traders here going back to 1689. They don't even know who founded this fort. It's between James Robertson, who led a party over the mountains, or John Donaldson, who brought several families down the rivers in a fleet of boats. The problem is, the timelines and logistics don't match. Robertson's group supposedly arrives first in late 1779, after crossing over land through the coldest winter they'd ever seen, and then they start building the fort. Donaldson's group, meanwhile, gets stuck in ice on the Tennessee River, attacked by Cherokee war parties, detours through Kentucky, then somehow makes it upstream against the current of the Ohio and Cumberland rivers in flatboats that were built to go downstream. It's a near impossible.
That don't make any damn sense right there. That sounds like a made up story. What y'all think in the chat, y'all? If y'all enjoying this, drop a fire emoji because you should be expecting part 2 tomorrow.
But the women inside let the hunting dogs out and save the day. That's kind of a weird story. And what's with this dragon canoe guy? He shows up all over Tennessee's history. And every time I see his name, I think that's a really weird name. He's basically the central figure in almost every frontier era Indian attack story from the 1770s.
Hey, and shout out to Tennessee King for being the only person to support today's live stream. And don't let my brother Tennessee King be the only one to support the channel. Make sure y'all come through and support. I see you in the chat, Root Words. I know you like this type of music. All right, Cash App information is in the chat. Y'all support through, man. Only if y'all enjoying it. Only if y'all enjoying it.
It's almost as if they were being used to play both sides, the official enemy on paper, but maybe also a middle layer in whatever was really going on. Then there's Buchanan Station in 1792, which is always shown as this little blockhouse that somehow fought off a massive night attack. The story says a few dozen settlers held back hundreds of Chickamauga warriors led by John Watts and Doublehead. But there's barely any physical proof that such a big battle happened here. No solid casualty numbers, no artifacts, nothing but secondhand accounts written years later. Oh, and another thing. So the French Lick is strange because apparently everyone who came here did so because of this salt spring. But as I was looking into it, the same French Lick, this name shows up later with these old hotels that were built around mineral springs. Like the
Now, French Lick is a name, right? That's weird because Nashville actually used to be named French Lick. Before it was named Nashville, it was called French Lick.
French Lick Springs Hotel over in Indiana. They were bottling and selling this water as medicine, claiming it cured everything from arthritis to depression. So maybe the early settlers or even the French traders knew there was something special about the water here, and the knowledge just got repackaged later as health resorts. So yeah, there were a bunch of people in this area before the 1800s, and in fact, most of them are buried beneath downtown Nashville, paved over as the city expanded. Every time a new building goes up, they dig into another set of bones. They literally call it a necropolis. And look, we're building up to something here. There's a reason I'm going over all this, because right after this point in history, we start to see Nashville's progress in this strange rapid way that does not match the timeline we're told. So from about 1780, right after the whole Fort Nashboro chapter, Nashville supposedly grows from a handful of log cabins into this booming river town in just a few decades. By the 1820s, it's being called the Athens of the South, which is wild when you think about how they were still fighting off attacks and living behind stockade walls a generation earlier. Where did all that knowledge, engineering, and money come from so fast? Then you've got the War of 1812, which they say put Nashville on the map because of Andrew Jackson. But even that story feels a little too convenient. Suddenly, this tiny frontier outpost turns into a strategic military hub. Jackson comes back a hero, and overnight, Nashville is the patriotic heart of the new nation. They don't really explain how the small river fort town had the manpower, weapons, and infrastructure to pull that off. It's just presented like it happened because of grit and luck. Right? This old Hickory story doesn't really add up. They say he gathered all these tough frontiersmen from Tennessee. But where? There was less than 300 people in Nashville at the time. Where did this army suddenly come from? And Nashville wasn't even a battlefield. There was no
Right.
before.
That's a fucking crucial point, right? Excuse my language. That is a crucial
How
point.
it becomes the rally point for Jackson's forces like it was some kind of established military hub. Keep in mind, Jackson, a Freemason, becoming a Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Tennessee in 1823, was married into a politically connected family, the Donaldsons, the same family tied to the founding of Nashville. Okay, but let's talk about that.
I actually know the Donaldsons, which is crazy.
Because why in what's supposed to be a frontier town is there already a Grand Lodge of Tennessee? That alone does not make sense in Nashville if it was still cabins and muddy roads. The Grand Lodge was officially chartered in 1813, which is just a few decades after Fort Nashboro. Barely enough time to go from log fort to state capital, let alone to have a full Masonic hierarchy with meeting halls, officers, and connections to lodges in other states. Notice how right after the British are defeated in New Orleans, now all of a sudden, After the reset of 1812, we essentially have the real start of Nashville. Around the same time, you get Montgomery Bell, the supposed ironmaster out in the woods near Dixon, building furnaces, tunnels, and full-blown industrial works that look 100 years ahead of the frontier around them. They call it the Cumberland Iron Works. But some of what he built, like a tunnel blasted straight through solid rock with early 1800s tools, feels way too advanced for a guy with a hammer and some slaves. I don't believe this Montgomery tunnel story at all. The tunnel is the first known example in the United States of a full-scale water diversion tunnel. It also apparently is the first full-scale tunnel of any type in the United States. Its completion predating that of the Auburn Tunnel, 1821 in Pennsylvania. And they said that he did this with gunpowder and some slaves basically by himself. Bell just shows up in the record out of nowhere as this self-taught genius engineer, running what was essentially an early industrial complex, but none of it survives today. In 1804, Tennessee is barely a state. Nashville is still a small settlement, and most of the region is wilderness, supposedly. Yet somehow, Montgomery Bell is buying and expanding a full-blown ironworks complex called Cumberland Furnace. Not a blacksmith shop, but a full industrial operation with furnaces, foundries, water-powered bellows, and ore routes already in place. By the War of 1812, which is why I'm bringing this up, his furnaces are producing cannonballs for Andrew Jackson's army, which means they already had the tools, materials, and logistics to cast iron weapons deep in the woods. That's a massive leap for a place that supposedly went from log cabins to frontier forts just a few decades earlier. The records call Bell Tennessee's first iron master. But you can't be a first unless someone already knew how to build blast furnaces, line them with firebrick, and supply them with charcoal and ore. By 1815, the nearby Laurel Furnace is turning out thousands of tons of pig iron every year. Industrial output that doesn't match the size or technology level of early 1800s Tennessee.
How the hell is they putting this shit out when people are literally living in log cabins the size of an outhouse during this time?
Of the richest men in the South. So where did the designs, skills, and capital come from? Because this doesn't look like the birth of industry. It almost looks like someone was restarting something that was already there. Then, not long after, the railroads start appearing, mid-1830s to 1850s, connecting Nashville to the rest of the country. That's less than 70 years after a few cabins around a spring. It's a huge technological leap in a very short time. But let's talk about the maps. So the earliest map is from 1834, and it gives us some of the earliest depictions of Nashville. It was published by J.P. Aries and engraved by Doolittle and Munson, who also engraved several other cities. They also did work for the Oddfellows and secret societies. Now this map is very interesting because it has a statistics section that doesn't really line up with the official story. This is what they're saying Nashville looked like in 1831. Here's an aerial view from Brown's Eminence. And these statistics are kind of crazy for 1831. Listen to this. Over 260 brick houses, nearly 200 frame houses, a steam-powered water system pumping 25 gallons an hour through cast iron pipes, a university, a state penitentiary, multiple newspapers, and millions of dollars in trade and manufacturing every year. They have some buildings listed here. The Presbyterian Church. This is connected to a building that we'll talk about later, but cool to see this listed here. It shows, obviously, Nashville was well developed during this time. But this is pretty advanced architecture. It says the first court was 1783, established 1784. What's this court? It even says that the Cumberland College was founded in 1806. Yet, in 1804, there was only 400 people. Here are the only building stats that we get. In 1787, there were 6 log houses, 30 cabins, so 36 structures. Then there's this gap, and all of a sudden, in 1831, there are over 300 brick structures from homes, offices, and stores.
How?
This is kind of the only real look at Nashville during this time, and it already by 1830 was a fully developed city. Okay, but now let's look at the 1888 bird's eye view of Nashville. look how much the city has developed in just 50 years. While sure, it's not impossible, we need to recognize that this is a great achievement, and it's beyond insane that this city went through so much growth in such a short period, considering how they tell us it was essentially empty for thousands of years. This is what we're questioning. Is it true that Nashville developed this quickly? Sure, you can say boomtown.
Or was the shit already there and they just took over? Was the war 1812 the survey, the planning of taking over the structures? And was the Civil War the ending and ramifications of them taking and destroying what was left?
The bridges and what looks to be raised railroads. Because we don't really get to see any progression. We see the 1830 depiction, and then we do get a few random photos from the 1850s that are questionable, and then bam, we get the 1888 map of Nashville. Where's the progress? A lot of cities do this. They will have like one or a few photos from this 1850s to 1860s period. Then there's this gap until the 1880s where we'll see the majority of these old downtown photos until the early 1900s. But what's with that? It really took until the 1880s when we finally start getting more photos of the town. Obviously, they could take photos in the 1850s and during the Civil War, but there really aren't that many. There's an interesting map from 1804, but it was published in 1880, so it's not really reliable. However, I thought I should bring it up, and there's also a depiction of the Cumberland River from 1784 that shows Donelson's flatboats. There's also an 1820s painting that shows a similar scene. There are a few engravings that show early depictions of Nashville, like this one from 1862. It shows what Nashville looked like during the Civil War. You can see the Capitol building and the Presbyterian Church in this one too. Oh, and I found this one. I'm not exactly sure what year this is, but it seems to be before the Civil War. But one thing I thought was crazy is you can see what looks like a fortified wall. Something you would see in Europe. And there was this guy on Facebook who was taking old photos of Nashville and putting them through AI to see what they would look like realistically. And even the AI picked that up. I mean, it looks like the remnants of a fortified city. So yeah, I wanted to show the mainstream progression of Nashville, and now we could start diving deeper. I mean, how do we know the Civil War really happened? And I know people hearing that for the first time might think it sounds crazy, but think about it. They literally call it the Western Theater in this area. So why Nashville? They say that it was a river and rail hub. By 1854, the Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad is complete. By 1859, the Louisville and Nashville line connects, turning the city into a major southern rail hub. But I think the most obvious point to bring up is that there's no battle photos of the Civil War. And you get the same answer every time from these old local historians. Oh, the technology couldn't capture the motion, so they didn't take it. I think that's BS of a response, because they did have fast exposure cameras in the 1860s, but we don't need photos of them in battle. How about of them before the battle when both armies are there? Just one. I'm not talking about the photos of the depots, the troop camps, and all these selfies that they took before the battles. I mean, there's literally no photos of the battles whatsoever. That is highly suspicious.
Which is what I've been saying the whole time, that there's no photos, there's no images of an actual battle. Only people dressed up in alleged war clothes and sitting around smiling, and even in some cases laying around acting like they were dead. Now, what I'm saying is, I also bring up to your attention that the Civil War doesn't have a declaration and it doesn't have a treaty. Most wars in the United States either have a declaration in a treaty or a declaration or a treaty. You understand what I'm saying, family? I don't believe the Civil War actually existed the way they say it existed. You understand what I'm saying? Y'all drop some fire emojis, man.
This. Not to mention, several Civil War photos were faked and staged by rearranging dead bodies on the battlefield after the supposed event took place. Now, there are Civil War era photos, but none of the battles themselves. I'm not buying that. This is actually a genuine question that gets brought up by several historians. They have articles on it. Why are there no photos of the Battle of Nashville? There was literally a US Army photographer whose whole purpose was to document the Civil War. And he was there, but didn't take any photos of all of the battle? Who cares if they're blurry? Just take the photo. And so I wanted to look at a few of these Civil War photos because I was looking through them and I found this photo, which is the Union Army at Nashville in 1864. So there were a series of battles for over a month, which were a part of the Franklin-Nashville campaign, and we have this photo. This is the most famous battle photo we have of Nashville because there's a lot going on and it looks like this is somewhat during or close to when the battle happened. And I'm looking at this photo on all these sites and I'm confused because this photo is clearly photo manipulated and I haven't seen one historian bring that up. This one isn't even a reach. You can clearly see this is a photo montage of multiple photos combined. You see this blurry section right here? That's not just exposure issues. You can see where they cut this foreground photo and added a separate photo for the background. The perspectives do not match. And you can see there's someone's head who got cut off in the mask. Right here, near the white section is what I'm talking about. This isn't a real photo. I'm reading this article, which is trying to explain why there are no battle photos, and it literally only shows 3 photos of the battlegrounds. One of which is photo manipulated. The other one has such bad quality, it almost looks like a drawing in the background, which they did do that kind of stuff. Then, there is one of the spectators watching a battle in a distance. The only other photo on here having to do with the battle is one of the outer trenches on the last day of the battle, but this one looks like the exact same angle as that low quality one. In fact, this is the same exact photo. I'm not sure if they're supposed to be the same place because one says Fort Morton and this one says the outer trenches. But yeah, here's the original photo. It's supposed to be the last day of battle on December 16th. On this one, you can see it a little bit more high quality, but this whole area looks airbrushed. I don't think that's smoke. It looks like that was added in. But I was zooming into this photo, and they're just sitting around. This doesn't look like a battle at all.
I told you, every time you look at their ass, they just sitting around. Like they never doing nothing. They're never bloody. They never scarred. There's never no bandages on them. Nothing.
Most of these people on the other side are in wagons. This doesn't look anything like they describe in the paintings. Look at this guy on the horse. He's not paying attention at all. There's also something strange going on right here. I don't know what it is. It doesn't look like a train, but something that's moving on this road possibly. Another thing, this house looks added in. It's the only spot that gets these random dark black levels that are typically a sign of manipulation, but also this edge right here is a little too sharp. And what's going on right here? This looks way too crowded, and the smoke definitely looks fake. No one's fighting here. The smoke wouldn't sit for that long. So this is the only photo that we have of the supposed battle for that long.
Oh yeah, this definitely looks staged.
So this is the only photo that we have of the supposed Battle of Nashville. Feels kind of weak. The funny thing is, it wasn't even until recently that they figured out where these battles happened. They needed local historians through the Preservation Society to figure out where the battles happened. So now we have a photo being used for what seems multiple locations. What else do we have? Well, everything else from the Civil War era is really of the town, and there are not that many photos. Here's a view of the city in 1864. So this is how they expect us to believe they were living? Why focus on the shacks and not just show the other parts of town? We do have some shots of the Capitol, and even up close, which is kind of crazy. I mean, look at this. This is 1860s.
1860s, they built some shit like this, and you got houses like this.
And yet, look at the background. They literally still have dirt roads.
Right.
I mean, these are some high quality photos. Look at this one with this weird ladder and the reflections, which the reflections might be painted. I'm not entirely sure. Then we have a photo of Fort Negley, which let's talk about this because it's kind of crazy. But yeah, this photo looks to have been altered as well. And I'm not even trying to throw that card at every photo. It's actually shocking how many photos were edited during this time. and they never really explain why. These Civil War photos of the soldiers at Fort Negley look like fakes to me. Look, here's one of them standing near this cannon. Something is off about this photo. They look like they were pasted in. Because look, I think there's a reason they decided to fake these photos. So I found one of the originals from the Library of Congress, and this is much more higher quality. Okay, so I was looking at this photo, and look, if this is photo manipulated, it was done by a professional who knows what they were doing. But two things immediately stood out to my eyes as weird about the photos: the stone lines and the people. I don't know what it was about the stones, but my first impression on seeing it was something seemed fake about the stones.
Yeah, this shit look computerized.
But I'm zooming.
How the fuck they got HD 4K photos in the 1800s, but you ain't got a proper photo of a war taking place between the Union and the Confederacy right there in front of each other, about to go to war?
in and looking at it in the foreground, and I mean, it looks real. They look a little bright compared to what's left over now, but I still couldn't figure out why they look weird. However, I was zooming in on the background and I noticed this. Right on the stonework in the back, there are these black blobs, the same color as the outlines. I think for some reason they were messing with these stones, whether it was emphasizing the lines or possibly even adding them in entirely. That's why they look so weird. These black lines are too consistent and thick throughout the image, giving it a look that it's been drawn on. So that's the first thing that's weird. Then there are the people. Well, they look like they've been added in, but like I said, whoever did it is good, because there are a few exposure doubles making it look realistic, but there are a few characters that do look like cutouts. They just have a soft edge, so it's hard to tell. But notice how dark they are. Why are they this dark? They look like they have a completely different lighting and mid-levels compared.
By the way, there's real photos in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, right? Before, this is the height of slavery. Why you don't see no slaves? How come ain't none of them niggas got no slaves working with them like you hear about in them stories? Remember, the slaves had to go be part of the Confederate soldier army and all this? How come they ain't got no slaves with them? You never see slaves.
to the tone and brightness of
You
the
never see a bunch of niggas chained up with tattered clothes on and shit.
environment. Either they darkened these figures for some reason, or they added them in from other photographs. You can kind of tell with this one guy in the back. He has a shadow that doesn't really make sense. It's kind of showing up on the back stone wall, and no, I don't think that's double exposure. Those look like cutouts to me. And even the whole story isn't adding up. Okay, so they're telling us that the Union forces came into Nashville in 1862 and began developing a series of forts that ringed the city.
Hey man, y'all hit that like button if y'all enjoying the video, man. Hit that like button, thumb up the video if y'all enjoying this, man. Make sure y'all support the channel as well. Cash App information is in the chat. Drop a fire emoji if y'all enjoying this thing.
The largest and southernmost was Fort Negley. So these are the photos of the fort we're shown. Yet, what's with these engravings? This is a literal star fort, and it was massive. Like I said, there are ruins of this that you can go see, and they look completely different from the Civil War era photos. Look at this aerial photograph from the 1930s to get an idea of what it looked like.
Damn.
The mainstream claim is that after the Union captured Nashville in
Ancient
February
Batman
1862,
symbols.
they immediately turned it into the main Union base in the Western Theater. Okay, so you basically have an outside group entering an enemy city, and in 3 years, between 1862 to 1865, they built 15 to 20 forts and batteries. They don't even know the full amount. Fort Negley was the main one, and it was built in 4 months in 1862, supposedly by just under 3,000 slaves and conscripted workers. By the Union? Okay. So they're telling us that in such a short time period, they built a defensive ring nearly 4 miles long, controlling all approaches onto the land. Okay, but that's insane. The scale and speed alone, Fort Negley used 62,500 cubic feet of stone, carved and hauled and fitted by hand, and it's just one of up to 20 forts built almost simultaneously. The logistics required for that in the 1860s is insane. Then, the engineering level comes out of nowhere. Negley is a multi-tiered stone fortress with bastions, something more like European masonry than improvised Civil War fieldwork. I mean,
Man, listen, in 1824, hold on. Let me show you this. We're going to go back to the more references books because that's what we're doing. We're bouncing back and forth. So the Annuals in Kentucky that was written in 1824, right? It talks about the enumerated cities and towns, right, that they seen in these particular areas. So each one of these show a conglomerate of cities, towns, and mounds. Look, ancient towns and mounds, Muddy River, found in a mound, right? You go down, you find more. You feel me? Several remains, hexapolygons, somersault. Look, stone mounds. You're gonna keep finding them. Anytime you see these, they're talking about referring to the Mississippian Valley. Look, in Alabama, many towns, forts, and mounds. You see that right here. Arkansas, many towns and mounds, several mounds right below the town, being buried up under. 4 squares, forts, Louisiana, mound, Mississippi area. So it's been documented of tons of cities and mounds and ancient reminiscences of towns going all the way back from many areas. Look, many towns in South Lake, Ontario. Look, North Carolina, some mounds near the Sawraw towns in the Holston River area. See what I'm saying? Tons of towns. Look, in Paris County, Upper Missouri, many fortified towns on the Missouri are located. Many of them. Pennsylvania, there's so many mounds and forts near Pittsburgh, off the Allegheny. Shout out to everybody that's in the building, man. If you enjoy this, hit the like button, support the channel. If you enjoy this, we're gonna break down more Nashville histories, the world's first exposed, ancient forts, hidden tech, photo manipulation. Part 2 will be going down tomorrow. We're about to get ready to get up out of here, so make sure y'all be safe as y'all move around this grand rising. Be aware, stay vigilant, and stay dangerous. It's your brother Original Power, and we out. Peace.
Keys on the track, on the track, on the track, on the track, on the track.
For the stats, I be beating the odds. Then the blood, it be making me calm. Ride the turbines just like I'm Saddam. I'ma blow up just like I'm a bomb. I'ma leave it.